Chapter 648. Su Fengnian bent down and took out a lacquered box from a bag by his feet. Contained a head smeared with lime. Su Beiji silently shifted his butt and hid in a corner, hiding far away. I heard from the old man in the sheepskin fur coat that the divine gate allowed one to become a land immortal. If it was a fake, it would take a long time to climb the divine gate. Fortunately, Old Li did not lie to me. There are only a handful of profound finger experts in the world. There are even fewer profound finger experts like you who have reached the peak. Those who died in such a humiliating manner like you are definitely even rarer. I don't know if I'll ever have the chance to use a strike like that again. I believe that if I were to do it again, I might not be able to use it even if I reached the true profound finger realm. You're really unlucky. Su Xiao once said that luck is also a form of strength. It's no wonder that your defeated opponent, Deng Mao, became one of the top 10 while you remained stagnant at the profound finger realm for more than a decade. As he listened to Su Fengnian ramble on with a head, Su Beiji could not take it any longer. With a pale face, he covered his nose and pleaded, "Can you close the box?" Su Fengnian lifted the box and handed it to Su Beiji, scaring Su Beiji so much that he slammed into the wall of the carriage. Su Beiji said angrily, "The dead should be respected. Raccoon Diwu is a long-established senior of the Jianghu. Can you not trample on his head?" The white-haired Su Fengnian put down the box and continued to stare at the head that had died with its eyes wide open as he nagged. Although Mount Bubang has so many Ruran cavalry under its control and is destined to be Bailiang's mortal enemy in the future, the two of us should have minded our own business. I could have taken my maidservant and fled far away while you remained your general and mountain chieftain. Instead, you came to kill me. Who else should I kill if not you? This time, I went to Beimang to practice my saber. Every drop of divine will that I cultivated with great difficulty has been destroyed by your hands. Why don't you come back to life and let me slash you again? Hey, are you a man? If you are a man, then open your eyes and give me a clear answer. At the side, Su Beiji really couldn't stand this bastard Persimmon's nagging. He said angrily, "Can you stop for a while?" Su Fengnian bent down to pick up the box and extended it in front of Su Beiji. "Come, Su Juzi, say goodbye to the fifth raccoon." Su Beiji turned his head and bumped into the wall of the car. He even had the thought of killing someone. Su Fengnian closed the lid, put it back into the cloth bag, and laughed heartily. Su Beiji said angrily, "Is it fun?" Su Fengnian curled his lips and said, "Not fun." Su Beiji lowered his voice and said angrily, "How are you going to inherit the title of King of Bailiang in the future? How are you going to fight with so many strong opponents?" Su Fengnian lay horizontally in the spacious carriage and crossed his legs. He said softly, "I'll take it one step at a time. What else can I do?" Su Beiji wanted to smash this guy called Persimmon to death with the book in his hand. However, he inadvertently saw his white hair and silently stopped. Su Fengnian sat up and lifted the curtain. He waved at Blue Bird, who was wearing armor and holding a spear. When Blue Bird came closer with mixed feelings, Su Fengnian's face was fierce and angry. If it wasn't for the fact that young master felt that you were beautiful, had a good figure, knew how to manage the household, and had outstanding martial arts skills, I really couldn't find a better girl or a more considerate maid than you. Otherwise, I would have abandoned you and run away in the Ruran Mountains. When you return to Bailiang, work hard to practice the four-word formula. In the future, when you kill a few finger profound realm experts, don't forget to say that you're this young master's maid before you kill someone. Remember." Blue Bird nodded lightly and smiled sweetly. The carriage returned to silence. Su Beiji read a few pages of scriptures that slandered Buddha. He couldn't help but raise his head and ask, "Is this how you treat all your servants?" Su Fengnian asked back, "Are you a master?" Su Beiji smiled and said, "I'm just a refugee. Of course I'm not a master. But you are." After Su Fengnian lay down, he looked at the ceiling and said softly, "That's why you'll never understand how Bailiang's 300,000 strong cavalry got to where they are today." No longer paying attention to Su Beiji, Su Fengnian finished humming that vulgar song for mountain patrol. Then he started humming a nameless song. What's a hero? Chopping off his head to make a urinal. What's a hero? Does he know a unique skill like the monkey picking peaches? What's a hero? When you're penniless, can you conjure up a big flatbread? Su Beiji, spoiled the mood, interrupted and asked, "Can I ask you something?" Su Fengyan stopped humming and nodded. Su Beiji asked curiously, "Do you still have the strength of a first pin?" Su Fengyan chuckled. "That's hard to say. As for me, I have a saber manual. Originally, I learned it step by step. After learning a move, I turned the page one by one. A while ago, I accidentally skipped to the last page. It's obviously a saber manual. The last page is called Lingxi, but it talks about the realm of the sword. What a coincidence. I have 12 flying swords on me. As long as they're not at the mysterious finger realm, I can kill one if one comes within 10 feet of me. If 100 come, I can still kill 100. Su Beiji said calmly. Amazing. Su Fengyan turned his head and asked in puzzlement, "Are you praising me or belittling me?" Su Beiji lowered his head to read the book. When he suddenly looked up, Su Fengyan had picked up the box again and displayed the gray head in front of him. The elegant and mellow Su Beiji couldn't care less about scholarly elegance. He gripped the book tightly and smacked the bastard. Su Fengyan smiled and retreated. He put away the box and the cloth bag. After lying down, he folded his hands and used them as a pillow. "Su Juzi, what do you think of the new nickname I gave you?" Su Beiji rewarded him with one word. Scram. Su Fengyan turned to the side and rummaged through the cloth bag. Su Beiji quickly sat up straight and nodded seriously. "This nickname is very good." Su Fengyan gave him a thumbs up and praised him. "You know the big picture and know when to advance and when to retreat. You're a first-rate strategist. Su Juzi, in the future, Bailiang will be the face. I have high hopes for you." Chapter 649. Originally, Su Beiji thought that after approaching the Maolong region, he would have to spend a little more effort before he could sneak into the south. However, very quickly, Su Beiji realized that the situation was beyond his expectations. Tens of thousands of refugees began to crazily flow along the two sides of the post house. Among them, there was no lack of luxurious carriages. According to the laws of Beimang, there were a few post house routes that did not allow soldiers or horses to set foot on. Thus, even though they were fleeing in panic, there were no tyrannical families that dared to set foot on the post house. Fortunately, the flow of people was huge. 2 flat paths had already been created on both sides of the post house. Carriages and horses could pass through without hindrance, only moving slowly. The post house routes of Beimang were interwoven like a net. The carriage that Su Beiji was in went against the flow. Behind him, there was an endless stream of cavalry that galloped from other post house routes to the south. Su Beiji ordered an Arrow Ridge cavalry officer to inquire about the situation. Only then did he receive an answer that made him even more flabbergasted. Even though Huang Songpu had personally led 90,000 elite cavalry to confront the Bailiang army, a group of Bailiang cavalry still directly slaughtered their way through the hastily set-up defensive line and headed straight for the capital of the south. Looking at their unstoppable sharpness, it seemed like they wanted to treat the 3 great generals as nothing and the 2 provincial decrees as decorations. They wanted to wipe out all the civil and military officials of the south. Historically, it had only been the northern cavalry going south that had this kind of boldness. Since this cavalry army, whose numbers had yet to be determined, were all white horses and white armor, it was naturally the great snow dragon cavalry without a doubt. Their movement made Huang Songpu's already not that tight defensive line even more loosen. The great king of the southern courtyard, who had always held righteousness in high esteem, speculated that this was the work of In Chi, who besieged the city to attack reinforcements during the Battle of Haluku. Together with the great number of military towns behind him, none of them were soft persimmons that could be crushed under their feet. He only transferred out 20,000 light cavalry to chase after them, even strictly ordering them not to take the initiative to attack, placing more of his attention on building the defensive line and keeping a close eye on the remaining Bailiang cavalry. Moreover, for the first time, he used his status as the great king of the southern courtyard, a status that many of the influential figures of the southern dynasty didn't treat too seriously, to give Guserong and the other 2 provinces 2 sets of military orders that left no room for leeway. The common people of the Southern Dynasty couldn't care less about whether or not the general's plans were flawless, whether or not they had a card up their sleeves, or whether or not they would completely wipe out the Baeliong barbarians after the battle. They only heard that as long as those barbarians' horse hooves entered the city, they would massacre the entire city until it was empty. They also heard that even sharp weapons like the Baeliong sabers were continuously chopped until creases appeared on the heads of the barbarians. The 10,000 Long Xiong army was already this ferocious, so the 10,000 men of tile building and gentleman's pavilion were simply not enough to fill the gaps between the barbarians' teeth, let alone Su Rentu's 30,000 personal troops. If by any chance Su Yenwang personally came to Beimang, would the common people be able to drown Su Rentu to death with their saliva? Who the hell swore to us that as long as the Beimang armored cavalry was willing to go south and fight, they would be able to fill that Gonliang River with the corpses of the Baeliong's 300,000 armored soldiers, piling them up into a gigantic capital like never before? Which son of a bitch dares to deceive us in front of our faces again? I'm gonna punch him until he's looking for his teeth on the ground. Su Beiji lifted the curtain and smiled as he introduced to Su Fengnian a group of cavalry troops with exceptionally solemn expressions outside the window. These are the troops from Huangxian town. The general leading them is surnamed Gu and his name is Luo. He's the son-in-law of the Longyao province's provincial magistrate. He's usually very arrogant and doesn't like anyone. It looks like he's really scared of you guys. The expression on his face is similar to that of someone who's ready to die. In the past few years, whenever the Baeliong army was mentioned, they would look askance and pout. Su Fengnian said flatly, "Foolish arrogance." Su Beiji laughed out loud and said, "Are you talking about me?" Su Fengnian frowned and said, "When you're in Baeliong, don't always talk about how your Baeliong is like. Baeliong has always been xenophobic. The military and the officialdom are similar. Let's not talk about the pros and cons of this kind of stubborn habit. In short, you have to take it easy." Su Beiji nodded and said, "I have my own plans." Su Fengnian muttered to himself, "Don't tell me they're really going to fight all the way to the imperial court of the South Dynasty? They must have eaten tens of thousands of pounds of bear's heart and leopard's guts. Who's the one leading the troops? It's not like Yuan Zhuozong's style." Su Beiji hesitated and said slowly, "Don't you find that Baeliong is a bit like the fields at the foot of the Ruren mountain that we saw?" Su Fengnian asked, "There's a shortage of young people and old people?" Su Beiji said slowly, "The king of Baeliong has 6 foster sons. Needless to say, Chun Jibao can be given the title of king anywhere. With his talent, he can even start his own army. Yuan Zhuozong is worthy of being called a talented general. It's not difficult for him to take charge alone. He can easily destroy a city with tens of thousands of elite troops. However, it's hard to say if he can command the overall situation. Qi Dangua is just a brute who charges into battle and carries the royal flag of Su. Yi Shizhen is good at scheming. He is called the next young talent Zhao Chongling. In the end, he is still a strategist behind the scenes who needs to rely on others. Yao Jian is a feng shui master who is familiar with unorthodox methods. He has always stood aloof from worldly affairs. As for Chu Lushan, Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Among Su Zhao's 6 adopted sons, if you really want to talk about who can barely stand shoulder to shoulder with Chun Jibao, it's only him. He is a true all-rounder. As long as it's something he knows, he's proficient in it. My master is not famous because of Zhao Chongling. Chu Qiu-er and Chun Jibao are in similar situations." Su Beiji continued, "Wei Fu, Chengdian, Xiongshou, Ningame, these young and strong high-ranking military officers, compared to Chun Jibao, the gap is very big, much less those who are biased toward you, the heir apparent, are pitifully few. Therefore, other than Chun Jibao and Chu Lushan, Baeliong cannot find a third outstanding general who can stand up to Dong Zhuo alone." Su Fengnian smiled but did not speak. Su Beiji asked, "Is there someone else hiding?" Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Have you forgotten my second sister?" Su Beiji said doubtfully, "You also know that talking on paper and personally leading troops are 2 different things." Su Fengnian's expression changed dramatically. He clenched his fists because he knew who was leading the Great Snow Dragon cavalry to Nanjing. Su Beiji immediately guessed the truth. He said bitterly, "If she can return to Baeliong alive, I will be convinced." Su Fengnian exhaled deeply. His brows relaxed. He closed his eyes and leaned against the wall of the carriage. He said with a smile, "Then you can be convinced now. My second sister had memorized all of Beimang's military towns, villages, and post stations before the age of 14. Su Beiji thought carefully in his heart and then shook his head hard. After a long time he asked, "Why?" Su Fengyan rubbed his face and said softly, "When she was young, she made a bet with my eldest sister. Second sister said that she would lead troops to Nanjing before the age of 30. Their bets are a book on the art of war and a box of rouge." Su Beiji snorted coldly. How can military matters be trifled with? The rout of the Longxiang army was clearly calculated by a military expert. Using losses to gain momentum can be seen as buying time for you. What is your second sister? Su Fengyan teased. If you have the guts, the next time you see her, ask her yourself. I don't dare anyway. Su Beiji was stunned. You even dared to go to Ruoshui and kill the fifth raccoon, but you don't dare to see your second sister? Su Fengyan sighed. He had a headache. When he was practicing the knife, he didn't talk to her when he saw her. This time, he went in a big circle in Beimang. Wouldn't she chase after him with a sword? The cavalry went deep into the hinterland like a butcher dismembering an ox. They bypassed many military towns and tore a perfect curve in Beimang's territory at the fastest speed. Their speed was fast, their strength was great, and their goal was clear. They all exceeded the limits of everyone's imagination in Beimang. The cavalry at the front didn't wear a helmet. In the young woman's field of vision, the majestic silhouette of Beimang's largest city already appeared. The eyes of the 9,000 light cavalry behind her were filled with crazed and burning worship. They never knew that war could be fought like this. It was like a big man strolling about in his own home. When he encountered a disobedient child who didn't have the strength to retaliate, he would fiercely smack him with a chestnut. Every time they came into contact, it was just like she said, where and when they would cross swords with many troops. It was because they bypassed all of the tough bones. With the great snow dragon cavalry's military strength, dealing with them was as easy as blowing off dust. Could it be that she was the mistress of Southern Dynasty? Going up north was a piece of cake, but going down south would be a tough battle. However, this daddy has even seen Nanjing Manor's city gate, so why would I be scared of you bunch of grandsons? The woman's appearance couldn't be considered a country-toppling beauty, but she was heroic and extraordinary. Her temperament didn't have the slightest bit of charm or delicateness mixed in. After she got off the horse, she fished out a yellowed book from her bosom. She ignited the flames and burned it to ashes. She raised her head towards the sky. Her lips moved slightly, and then she silently mounted her horse. Chapter 650. The heavy snow in Beiliang's winter over the years had always been heavy, unlike in the south. This made the children, who had recently settled down in this barren and desolate land, very happy. The amount of iron or war horses and food in Beiliang was not something they could touch. Among the 4 children, the eldest daughter wasn't particularly outstanding. She was just like any other young girl who liked to use rouge and face powder. It was just that she had a feisty temperament, just like when she swung on the swing. She wasn't as reserved as the other young ladies of noble families, always wishing that she could swing higher than the top floor. The second child was the most intelligent. Since childhood, he had been regarded as a child prodigy. He learned to read very quickly and was introverted. Everyone said that he took after his mother. The third child looked the most like his beautiful mother. He was a typical lucky man from the north and a prime minister from the south. He was destined to be a noble since he was born. Perhaps this family's descendants had used up all their luck on the first 3 children. So the fourth child, who was born and raised in Beiliang, was a little pitiful. Just like the land in his hometown, he had never cried since he came out of his mother's womb. After he could walk, he was simple and naive. He was yellow and skinny, and there were often 2 lines of snot hanging from his nose, mixed with saliva. The servants in the mansion also thought that the mistress died because of him. In private, they liked the first 3 young masters from the bottom of their hearts. Only the fourth child, who was extraordinarily strong, disliked him. Some brave young servants would fiercely bully him when there was no one around. Anyway, the little boy was like copper tendons and iron bones, so he was not afraid of being pinched. Even if he was slapped a few times, it would not be a big deal as long as he was not seen by the housekeepers and gatekeepers. The 12-year-old Su Weisheng's study was spotless and orderly. There were no superfluous decorations, except for the 4 treasures of the study and the vast number of books that included the 100 schools of thought. Every book on the bookshelf was meticulously circled with a red pen. Today, she was writing the character Yong meticulously. As the second commandery princess of Beiliang Palace, she was known to be good at everything except calligraphy. This made Su Weisheng, who was always eager to outdo others, go to a dead end and swear to write a satisfactory regular script. It was okay if he couldn't beat his brother. But how could he lose to her? She had long been familiar with the true meaning of calligraphy. She didn't need others to teach her how to write. She knew very well how to write with a straight brush and a side brush to the point of perfection. However, when it came to her to write, it was always twisted like an earthworm. This made Su Weisheng, who had written more than 3,000 characters this autumn, a little annoyed. A handsome boy with red lips and white teeth carried a corpse that was smaller than him into the study. Su Weisheng raised the corner of his eyes slightly and ignored him. The luxuriously dressed child put down the corpse and laughed. "Huang Manor, we're here." The corpse, lying on the ground, immediately stood up after hearing the voice. He grinned foolishly, with 2 snot drooling and a lot of saliva hanging from his nose. This pair of brothers was Su Fengyan and Su Longxiang. Huang Manor liked to be dragged by his brother. He also liked to be thrown into the snow by his brother on a snowy day. His whole head was cold and very comfortable. Su Fengyan reached out and carefully wiped his brother's snot and saliva. Then he wiped it on his cuffs carelessly. He pointed to a wind-weather seismograph with a dragon head facing a toad in the study. He patted Huang Manor's head and said with a smile, "Go and play with the toad. Remember not to break it this time. If second sister chases you away, I won't help you." The yellow child obediently squatted beside the big bottle. This time, he didn't secretly pull up the toad that was squatting on the ground to catch the bronze ball. Su Fengyan lay on the desk and shouted, "Second sister, you're still practicing calligraphy. What are you practicing for? Let's go fishing by the lake." Big sister has already set up the embroidery stool. Su Weisheng, who was already a young girl, didn't even look at her brother Su Fengyan. Su Fengyan scratched his head and said helplessly, "You really don't want to go?" Su Weisheng said impatiently, "Write another 60 Yong characters. I still want to study." Su Fengyan, who was used to it, said, "Oh," and laughed. He grabbed the brush and spread out a large piece of paper. He scribbled a few dozen Yong characters in one breath before returning the brush to his second sister. "Look, you've already finished writing. Let's go play together." Su Weisheng glared angrily. The little heir of Beiliang Palace whistled and didn't care at all. Su Weisheng put down the brush and said coldly, "Just half an hour." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Okay." The 3 siblings walked out of the study together. Huang Man'er was naturally dragged out by his brother. Su Fengyan asked, "Second sister, when is it going to snow?" Su Weisheng frowned and said, "The frost has just started. It's not even the beginning of winter yet. Besides, it might snow a few days after the light snow this year." Su Fengyan made a face and said, "Second sister, you're so smart. Why don't you just let the heavens snow earlier?" Su Weisheng reached out and pinched the little heir's ear hard. This year, Beiliang's first snow really did come 3 days after the light snow. The 2 young ladies and the 2 younger brothers were having a snowball fight. Su Fengyan had to persuade his second sister to come out of the study and play with her. Of course, he and his second sister were on one side, while his eldest sister, Su Jihu, and his younger brother, Huang Man'er, were on the other side. Because the terrifyingly strong Huang Man'er had told her brother that he was only allowed to make snowballs and not throw them. In addition, under the command of his second sister, Su Weisheng, Su Fengyan played in a very methodical manner. The isolated and helpless Su Jihu was naturally smashed many times. However, after surrendering, she secretly stuffed a snowball into Su Fengyan's collar and was satisfied. Su Fengyan grimaced and took out a snowball from his clothes as he said to his second sister, "How about we go to Tide Listening Pavilion to enjoy the scenery?" Su Weisheng refused without hesitation. "No, I want to study." Su Jihu helped her brother take out a snowball and said with a smile, "It's enough for a girl to marry a good husband. You've read so many military books. Don't tell me you still want to be a general?" Su Weisheng glanced at this older sister who had been an enemy since they were young. She couldn't be bothered to speak and turned to leave. Su Jihu made a face at her younger sister's back. Su Weisheng seemed to have eyes on the back of her head. She paused and turned her head to say coldly, "How many more years do you think Su Fengyan will be able to play?" Su Jihu furrowed her beautiful brows. She put her hands on her hips and asked, "How do you know?" Su Fengyan sensed that something was amiss and knew that they would be implicated if they stayed any longer. He pulled Huang Man and hurriedly left the battlefield. Afterwards, he found out that his two sisters had made a bet. That year, the snow in Beiliang was exceptionally heavy. The young heir almost thought that the heavens were an old farmer who raised geese. Otherwise, why would there be so much goose feather snow? Su Fengyan was led by a man in a black robe into the military town of Maolong in a carriage. The taciturn man was the coachman himself. Maolong, who was patrolling the city, saw the man's token and stood still solemnly. The general's token. Beiliang was huge, and there were 300,000 cavalrymen, but there were only 9 tokens in total. The 6 adopted sons of the general each had 1 token. The other 3 tokens were in the hands of someone else. Su Fengyan recognized the general's token and the coachman's identity. He only had 1 title, Ugly. He was one of Su Zhao's men of sacrifice from Earth Branch. In the Battle of the Concubine's Tomb, Yuan Zuozong was not the only one who survived. This man of sacrifice also survived. The number of people he killed was not much less than White Bear Yuan Zuozong. Su Fengyan did not reveal his identity as the heir and went to the general's mansion in Maolong. He just chose a secluded inn to stay in. The innkeeper had already fled for his life. However, with Blue Bird by his side, Su Fengyan did not have to do anything. Everything was comfortable. Su Fengyan said that he would stay here for a few more days. Ugly naturally had no objection. When this cold-hearted man of sacrifice first saw His Royal Highness, he also had a fleeting moment of absent-mindedness. When he wrote the 4 words in the secret letter, his hand trembled slightly. The heir's hair turned white. After waiting for 3 days, Su Fengyan left the city and went south. The carriage had not yet arrived at Gujuan town. Waves of iron hooves shook the earth. No less than 5,000 white horses rushed over like a line of snow. Su Fengyan walked out of the carriage with a wry smile and met the cavalry behind him. The first horse galloped and then slowed down. The woman rode the horse to a dozen steps away from Su Fengyan and looked down at him coldly. She originally had too many words of reprimand hidden in her mind, to the extent where she even wanted to give him a few horse whips, and then tie him up and bring him to northern Liang. However, when she saw the exceptionally unfamiliar scene in front of her, the lips of this heroic woman who could enter northern Mang as if there was no one around her trembled, unable to utter a single word. Su Fengyan wanted to say something but stopped. She raised the whip and pointed at Su Fengyan. She said angrily, "Su Fengyan, if you have the ability, die in Beimang." She turned the horse around and galloped out. After she turned her back to the white-haired man, her vision blurred. She covered her heart with one hand. Su Fengyan stood in the same place. He looked up at the sky and reached out to block the dazzling sunlight. The snow cavalry came in a hurry and left in a hurry. Su Fengyan was about to return to the carriage when a barefoot youth in black clothes fell from the sky with a loud crash, creating a huge crater. Su Beiji, who had walked out of the carriage and stood beside the horse, opened his mouth wide. The black-clothed youth originally had a silly smile on his face, but when he looked at his older brother, he suddenly burst into tears. Then he let out a roar towards the north. Su Beiji covered his ears but couldn't bear it. The 2 horses even bled from their 7 orifices and died on the spot. If Su Beiji didn't have the ugly death warrior holding his arm, he wouldn't have ended up any better. Only Su Fengyan, who no longer had De Huangting by his side, did not suffer at all. The youth in black crouched down and carried his older brother, who he thought was seriously injured. He wanted to carry him back home. Su Fengyan patted Huang Manor's head and said with a smile, "I'm fine. You go and stop second sister. Don't let her lead the troops north." Huang Manor shook his head vigorously. The world was big, but it was not as important as him protecting his older brother on his back. Su Fengyan said patiently, "Be good. The three of us will go home together." Just as Huang Manor carefully put down Su Fengyan, a horse returned. Chapter 651. Today, in Liang Dynasty's morning court session, the civil and military officials dressed in court attire filed into the city, the sound of jade striking jade still ringing out for a long time. Gentlemen listened to the sound of jade, and their actions were restrained. The specifications of jade ornaments were like rank, also paying particular attention to a step-by-step order, an insurmountable thunder pool. Even though the Liang faction struggle wasn't out of control under Grand Secretary Zhang's control, the imperial censor was still able to get serious over trivial matters. Jean Lanting's appearance in the morning court session today was especially eye-catching. Half a year ago, he lost his noble Great Yellow Gate, but he always lived in the capital. At first, that mansion that was completely deserted, after he impeached the king of Beiliang, Su Shao, and had his official hat removed, visitors came in an endless stream. This time, he came to the morning court session under imperial decree. Even an idiot knew that the imperial court had hidden him for an entire half a year, giving Su Shao enough face. It was time to give Jean Sabin a higher rank. This wasn't Jean Lanting's current morning court session. While waiting outside the door, he was surrounded by his colleagues' enthusiastic and attentive calls. He also had a set of brand new jade artifacts hanging from his waist. Jade ornaments and jade beads collided, jade pendants and jade teeth colliding, releasing a wave of clear and melodious sounds. As he walked between the halls, the sound was extremely beautiful. Apart from Jean Lanting, who was the most eye-catching figure, there was another person at Great General Gu Jiantong's side who had hurried back to the capital from the northern border, who was similarly eye-catching. It was a new face, but during this half-year in the capital, people's ears had long grown calluses from hearing so much about him. An ordinary Jianghu man surnamed Yuan, a carp that jumped over the dragon's gate, suddenly became half a great general's adopted son. It was rumored that his temperament was stubborn, vicious, and merciless, tormenting the Jianghu sects on the border until they were half dead. Yuan Tingshan followed behind Gu Jiantang, and just so happened to be walking shoulder to shoulder with Jin Sanlang, who was behind Zhang Julu and Grand Secretary Zhang. In comparison, the jade ornament on Yuan Tingshan's waist was very simple, crude, and refined, a typical gossamer drawing, combined with the Hamba saber's cutting technique. Jean Lanting was cultured and refined. After being immersed in the capital's officialdom for 2 years and experiencing the bitterness and hypocrisy of the world, after joining the Zhangdang's tutelage, he didn't have the slightest bit of arrogance. At this moment, seeing Great General Gu Jiantong's adopted son, the future son-in-law who was set in stone, when Yuan Tingshan glanced at him, Jean Lanting immediately returned a smile. Little did he expect that this minor official, who was participating in the morning court session for the first time, would unexpectedly spit and lower his head to spit. Jean Lanting was extremely embarrassed, but his skin was who knows how many inches thicker than when he first entered the capital, so he dismissed it with a laugh. Yuan Tingshan's brazen actions made the hearts of some of the eunuchs in the distance tremble. Fine, it was clear that he was another thorn in the side. Yuan Tingshan quickened his pace and asked Gu Jiantang in a low voice, "Great General, when will I be able to carry a saber to court like you?" Gu Jiantang turned a deaf ear. Zhang Julu shot a glance at this young martial artist, who had been heard of in half of the capital before even seeing his face. He seemed to find it amusing and laughed. Yuan Tingshan still wanted to nag, but Gu Jiantang said coldly, "If you say another word, you'll get lost from the capital." Yuan Tingshan chuckled and said, "I won't say any more. I won't say any more." Jean Lanting cursed silently in his heart. "You brat, you've already said 6 words. However, Great General Gu, who had firmly controlled the Ministry of War for more than a decade, didn't care about this kind of slippery behavior. This made Jean Lanting immediately have a higher opinion of this person surnamed Yuan. Gu Jiantang and Zhang Julu both looked at a corner in the distance at almost the same time. Jean Lanting was stunned for a moment. He wore the red python robes of a great eunuch, and stood there quietly like a red cat that had been hunting mice in the palace all year round. Yuan Tingshan clicked his tongue. An expert. Jean Lanting only glanced at him from a distance and didn't dare look again. He quickly lowered his head, afraid that this notorious eunuch would remember his appearance. There was no wall in the world that didn't have a crack. Presently, there was news from the palace that this powerful eunuch, the head of the court's 100,000 eunuchs, still held a revered position. He was no longer as unmoving as he had been for more than a decade. This was because a young eunuch who had entered the palace at a young age had been chosen by Empress Zhaoji. Together with a few servants, he could be said to have interacted with the emperor day and night. His name was Tonglu, and he had only recently been bestowed the surname of Song by the emperor. Song Tonglu came from the Directorate of Credentials of the 12 Directorates. His background was clean, and his master was the head eunuch of the Internal Affairs Bureau. For many years, he was one of the few eunuchs who could walk side by side with Han Diaoxi in the palace. Song Tonglu had never made a mistake in the matter of imperial edicts. He was kind to others and had a gentle personality. Other than the difference between his position and Han Diaoxi's, his personality was also the complete opposite. At this sensitive time when several princes in the capital were about to be made kings, the emperor was close to Song Tonglu, who had been promoted by the empress, and was estranged from Han Diaoxi, who was close to Prince Zhao Kai. This undoubtedly made the powerful officials and nobles smell a trace of blood. The number of people who wanted Han Diaoxi dead was no less than the number of officials who wanted Su Shao to fall from power. Some of the officials in the capital who had quietly placed their bets on the princes were secretly glad that they hadn't wasted their energy on Zhao Kai, whose background was unclear. For the first time in more than a decade, the red python-robed eunuch who hadn't appeared in court gently turned around and walked without a sound. Han Diaoxi habitually walked in the shadows of the palace walls. It was impossible to see the expression on his clean white face. Chapter 652. Beimang didn't have a capital until Murong Empress usurped the throne. She used 400,000 soldiers and 900,000 people to build the capital. Took 9 years. The king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan, and the father and son from the central plains, Zhang Rou and Zhang Lu, were responsible for the planning. Immortal Qilin and many geomancy masters also participated in the planning. After the new city was built, the royal family, nobles, and civil and military officials first moved in. Now, there were 30,000 prostitutes in Beimang. It could be seen that the capital of Beimang was magnificent and not inferior to the capital of Liang. It was just that after the capital was established, the empress still followed the ancient system of the 4 seasons of the tent, going out to patrol all 4 seasons. The Northern Mang's Painted Ash Conference, which had been criticized by the Central Plains for a long time, originated from this. This year's autumn tent tiger hunting and deer hunting was pushed back slightly. The influential nobles of the Northern Mang royal court were all talking about it. Many of the older nobles who had the qualifications to participate in the tent hunting in the past, but found excuses not to go, eagerly participated in it without exception. Unfortunately, they were greatly disappointed. In the capital, there was a declining branch of Taoism called Chongqing Taoist Temple. After losing the competition with Tao De sect for the national religion of Beimang, the incense was no longer as prosperous as before. Only a few old pilgrims would come to pray during the 9-yen festival. It was hard to believe that 20 years ago, this place was called the top of Beimang's Taoist temple. Every festival, high officials and nobles would gather together with the common people. It was only because the immortal in the temple had opened a Taoist temple, and immortals were willing to teach the art of longevity. These years, the Chongqing Temple could only rely on some scholars who were rushing to take the imperial examinations to stay overnight. Perhaps the Chongqing Temple's luck was really at its end. There had never been a scholar who was nominated after staying here. Over time, the 20 or so Taoists in the temple had been living more and more desolate lives. Fortunately, an old scholar came a few days ago and gave them a decent amount of silver. Only then were they able to eat. The old Confucian scholar who rented a dark and gloomy side room had a good conversational style. He often chatted with the old Taoist priests for an entire afternoon. When they were alone, the old Confucian scholar would flip through some of the scriptures that no one had been interested in for many years. He lived a leisurely and peaceful life. One day, a tall, sleepy man came to the Chongqing Taoist temple. He didn't even bat an eyelid as he swept the floor full of fallen leaves. The pilgrim asked twice in a warm voice. The little Taoist boy lazily picked up the broom and pointed to the old Confucian scholar's remote residence. The man walked over with a smile. After passing 2 courtyards, he found the old Confucian scholar sitting in the middle of the courtyard. The man respectfully said from the bottom of his heart, "Jing Yan greets the imperial decree of peace." The old scholar came back to his senses and smiled. He gestured for the newcomer of the chess and sword music school to sit down casually. Hong Jingyan put on a posture of listening attentively. The old Confucian scholar glanced at this proud student who had been deliberately suppressed by him. He said softly, "I know what you're here to ask for. I might as well be frank with you. If I were to shamelessly ask His Majesty for the iron cavalry of the Ruran 5 towns, I could also hand it over to you. However, this would put you at a disadvantage. It would be disadvantageous for you to display your skills in the future. The Ruran 5 towns are surrounded by the covetous Dong army. Even the capital and its surrounding regions are not generals with outstanding military achievements. You can't compare to them. Even if you succeed, how much empty space can you get? That's why I say that this kind of stiff robbery is not as good as a small, sharp strike without evil hands." Hong Jingyan asked with a smile, "Go directly to the tile-built gentleman's tavern?" The old Confucian scholar nodded. Hong Jingyan said with a bitter face, "You want me to gather tens of thousands of troops by myself?" The old Confucian scholar scolded with a smile. "You're as thick-skinned as ever. Don't think that just because I haven't been in the chess and sword music school all these years, I don't know that you have hooked up with the sons of the northern and southern nobles. Let alone tens of thousands, as long as you dare, even 100,000 wouldn't be a problem, right? Just those sons and daughters of the capital who crave military achievements would flock into Dragon Waste Province without bringing their own personal guards and forcefully gather tens of thousands of troops. I'll say the ugly things first. This time, Your Majesty was hesitant about who to send to confront the Bailiang army. Was it Huang Songpu or Tuoba? I mentioned it in passing, so you chose Huang Songpu. This is because I don't want the situation of the northern and southern confrontation to become a situation of war on all fronts. I know that by using this king of the southern courtyard, who is good at defending, Bailiang won't have a falling out and will be willing to stop while we're ahead. This way, I'll have enough time to set up a trap. Only that wicked old turtle, Huang Longshan, loves to do wicked things. As for you, you'll be the first chess piece in Baimang's new game. You'll be the most important. How about it? Are you going or not?" Hong Jingyan furrowed his brows and did not immediately give a reply. The old Confucian scholar, who was already the emperor's tutor, said, "There's no rush. Let's make a decision after you've thought it through. If you feel that controlling the Ruran cavalry is more advantageous and can give me a convincing reason, I can very well let you go to the Ruran mountains and become the mountain king." Hong Jingyan softly said, "To tell the truth, whether I go to the gentleman's pavilion or the Ruran mountains, right now, the sword chi is not by your side. You can't be at ease." The old Confucian scholar shook his head. "I know what I'm doing." Hong Jingyan looked around and laughed. "Are you really not going to meet those nobles in the imperial tent who are willing to dig 3 feet into the ground just to find you?" The old Confucian scholar indifferently said, "Burning the stove in the officialdom is a great skill. Those fellows who have gone hunting to find me are actually burning a few sticks of incense to Su Huainan right now. Only then will His Majesty pay attention to them. Those who foolishly come to me to burn incense and pray to Buddha and Bodhisattva are all carrying pig heads and meat. Even if I were a true Bodhisattva, I'd still be sick of eating them. When the stove is cold, they can give me a bowl of porridge and a plate of pickles to fill my stomach and warm my heart." There was a long period of silence. Hong Jingyan suddenly stood up and bowed with his hands clasped in front of him. "I ask the magistrate of peace to play a game of chess with me." The old Confucian scholar waved his hand, ordering him to leave. Hong Jingyan laughed at himself. He did not insist and left the Chongqing monastery. The old Confucian scholar slowly walked to the entrance of the monastery. The boy who was sweeping the floor was exhausted and sitting on the steps. There were already several baskets of fallen leaves at his feet. The old Confucian scholar smiled and bent down to pick up the broom. He helped the little boy sweep the floor. The poor scholar Chen Liangxi was in a small tea house. He muddle-headedly met a rich man from Beiliang who was talking about everything under the sun. He also muddle-headedly followed the hunchbacked and lame old man into a house. There were 2 jade lions in the house and a large plaque with golden words. The little beggar who had been reading with him along the way gently raised his head and read, Beiliang Palace. ####, please guarantee the monthly votes. You guys vote and I'll diligently write. It's that simple. The votes you guys throw at the first 3 days of the month are too ferocious. Therefore, in August, I'll definitely write a perfect second volume. Then, I'll write an even better third volume, He Xinliang. Chapter 653. Seeing that the 2 horses were killed by Su Longxiang, Su Weisheng asked the crossbowman to bring 2 more horses. Ugly was not suitable to show himself, so Su Weisheng sent him to hide in the dark. Blue Bird drove the carriage. Su Fengyan sat in the carriage while Su Weisheng rode the horse outside. Su Beiji sat in the same room as Su Longxiang, his entire body feeling uneasy. Right now, Rentu's second son's infamy had spread far and wide in northern Mang. No one doubted his ability to break through enemy lines. Su Beiji was truly scared that a single word of disagreement would cause his limbs to be torn apart like a grasshopper's legs by this withered yellow youth. Su Fengyan lifted the curtain and said, I originally wanted to enter through Toppling Horse Pass. Which way do you want to go? Su Weisheng said calmly, I'm just giving you a ride. Father gave me tens of thousands of cavalrymen, not to send them to their deaths. Su Fengyan deliberately ignored the innuendo in his words and said with a smile, When we part, I'll give you a gift. Su Weisheng did not comment. She walked for 7 to 8 miles, stopped the horse and said, Although there are no more than 1,000 Beimang soldiers near Gu Maolong, there are still many horse stables left. Su Fengyan got off the carriage and handed Su Weisheng a bag. She said indifferently, It's okay. Other than Blue Bird and Ugly, there's also an otherworldly item wandering 100 miles away. It has the finger mysterious realm. Su Weisheng hung the cotton bag on the side of the saddle. Su Fengyan pleaded, Don't throw it away without taking a look. Su Weisheng hesitated and did not rush to turn the horse around. Su Fengyan was familiar with his second sister's cold temperament. He said, It's the head of the 5th raccoon. Su Weisheng frowned and said, The mountain master of Bing Ti Mountain. Dongzhu's father-in-law? Su Fengyan nodded. Su Weisheng asked, You and a few others succeeded in the sneak attack? Su Fengyan was speechless. Su Beiji, who got off the carriage with Su Fengyan but stood far away, said softly, Second Commandery Princess, His Royal Highness killed the 5th raccoon by himself. I Su Beiji can testify. Su Weisheng sneered and said, How did the king of North Courtyard, Su Huainan's concubine's grandson, change his master? When do you plan to go to Liang Imperial Court and become a slave of 3 surnames? As expected of Su Weisheng, who knew Beimang like the back of his hand. Su Beiji did not explain anything to her relentless criticism. Su Fengyan tried to smooth things over and said, Second sister, can you not scare Juzi? He's a good person. Not long ago, he even praised your poetry and said that he wanted to compare notes with you. Su Weisheng patted the ancient sword at his waist and said with a smile, Compare notes? Compare notes on swordsmanship? Didn't you tell him that I like to compare notes with scholars and common people? Su Beiji had truly experienced the rudeness of Beiliang's second commandery princess. Su Fengyan said helplessly, All right. He patted the horses but lightly and let Su Weisheng gallop away. Su Fengyan and Su Beiji looked at each other and smiled. They both felt relieved. Su Beiji sighed softly and said, He has the demeanor of Empress Murong. Su Fengyan hugged his neck and scolded jokingly, How dare you talk about my sister like that? Do you want to die? The scholar, who was almost out of breath from being strangled, shouted, "How is this belittling?" Su Fengyan let go of his hand and sat in the carriage with him. "You'll know in the future." After sitting down, Su Fengyan threw the sword case to the black-clothed youth who was grinning from ear to ear. "Huang Manor, there are 3 swords in there. I'll give them to you. Didn't you get stabbed by a willow branch? Next time you see him, return the 3 swords to him." Su Longxiang held the sword case and laughed foolishly. Su Fengyan turned his head to Su Beiji and said, "Bailiang Palace has an abundant collection of books. If there's anything you like, just take it. It'll be your personal collection. Treat it as my meeting gift to you. How about it?" Su Beiji smiled sincerely and said, "It's enough." Su Fengyan thought for a while and said, "When we reach the prince's mansion, why don't you change your name?" Su Beiji shook his head and thanked Su Fengyan for his good intentions. It was obviously not wise to parade around Bailiang with the identity of Su Huainan's grandson. However, there were some things that Su Beiji did not want to shrink back from. Su Fengyan said regretfully, "Su Juzi. What a delightful name." Su Beiji reminded him, "Your Highness, you don't have Diwu Raccoon's head anymore." Su Fengyan said, "Oh," and snapped his fingers. Not long after, a slender, snow-white wrist reached into the carriage curtain. When Su Beiji saw the happy face of the otherworldly item in the red robe, he had goosebumps all over his body. Su Beiji forced a smile and flattered him against his will. "Your Highness is confident in everything. You are worthy of being the heir of a vassal state." Su Fengyan waved his hand, and the otherworldly item's elixir infant floated away from the carriage. Then, he held Su Beiji's hand and said with a smile, "You and I admire each other so much. It's a pity we didn't meet earlier." The corner of Su Beiji's mouth twitched and he whispered, "Your Highness, did you also say the words a pity we didn't meet earlier to Diwu Raccoon?" Su Fengyan smiled and slapped Su Beiji to the ground. Then he said softly, "I like to walk the same path again. They say that there's no turning back in this world. Taking advantage of the opportunity to walk the path, it's very comfortable." Without the otherworldly item's intimidation, Su Beiji became more courageous and said, "Your Highness, didn't you have a secret conversation with that retainer when you went out earlier? Didn't you want him to arrange something so that you could secretly meet Yozhou's Gai Commandant, Huang Fuqiong?" Su Fengyan didn't say yes and only asked curiously, "You even know Huang Fuqiong?" Chapter 654. Su Beiji nodded. "At Ruoshui Hut, Grandpa said that you helped him to the position and used him to stir up the military in Yuzhou. At first, I didn't think highly of Huang Fuxi, but now I don't dare to underestimate him." Su Fengyan asked, "Have you prepared how to show off your talent to Su Xiao?" Su Beiji smiled and said, "A woman's pregnancy can only be seen after a few months. It's just a matter of learning, so it takes time. I have some glib tongue, but I can deal with other people. After meeting the second princess, I really don't want to go to the Prince of Northern Liang to be scolded. I've already thought about it. When the time comes, I'll ask the king of Bailiang for a remote and desolate county. I'll start as a lowly official. I'll be able to do some practical things, and it won't delay me from sending a small gift to your Highness. The gift itself will take 1 or 2 years to complete." Su Fengyan was surprised. "You can really endure being unknown for a few years?" Su Beiji calmly said, "When have I ever been famous?" Su Fengyan grabbed Su Beiji. "Su Juzi, you're really famous." Su Beiji smiled and tried to break free from Su Fengyan's grip, but he couldn't do it. He said helplessly, "Your Highness, even if it's just a compliment, please show me more sincerity." Su Fengyan increased his strength and nodded with a smile. Okay. Show me more sincerity." Su Beiji, who had taken off the mustached man's skin, was fair and elegant. At this moment, he was in so much pain that his face turned red. Su Fengyan laughed and released his grip. Su Beiji angrily said, "Bullying others with martial arts? Is that what a real man should do?" Su Fengyan, who had also restored his true appearance, snapped his fingers again. Su Beiji thought that the otherworldly item wanted to join the fun again. He was so scared that he kept quiet out of fear. Su Beiji had been on tenterhooks for a long time, but the otherworldly item was nowhere to be seen. Su Fengyan giggled and said, I just snapped my fingers. Do you really think that the otherworldly item in the princess tomb is some kind of earth immortal? Do you really think that I can sense it from 100 miles away just by snapping my fingers? Su Beiji took a deep breath and lowered his head to flip through a book that he had found with great difficulty in the inn in Maolong military town. Although he looked furious, his eyes were gentle and there was a smile on his face. He was once afraid that the monarch he had to serve was a mediocre person with great ambition but little ability. However, he was even more afraid of meeting a master who seemed to be respectful and modest, who on the surface wished to sleep on the same bed and eat the same bowl as you, but in the depths of his heart, he only treated scholars as murderers. Su Beiji didn't want his knowledge to be wasted on reading people's expressions and guessing their thoughts. Su Beiji put down the book and said worriedly, Before you came to Beimang, the Liang imperial court had already started to arrange for the princes to leave the capital and be enfeoffed as county kings. County kings don't have military power, but they can participate in local, state, and county politics. These first-generation county kings of the Liang dynasty after the spring and autumn period were given a single title. Currently, we know that there are 3 kings of Tang, Chu, and Shu. I think that the king of Shu will most likely be Zhao Kai. The second king of Jing and Zhao Sun obviously had an expert to advise him. He was the first one to take the initiative to hand over all military power, which is bound to give the king of Yanqi and the king of Guangling a headache. I heard that you had a particularly bad relationship with the old king of Jing, and Xiangfan is also one of the most important cities in the world. No matter if it's east or south, it's a place that must be fought over. Su Fengyan smiled and said, Zhao Sun beat me up like a drowning dog, and I also stole the Princess Jing, and that he secretly admires. That brat can't wait to skin me alive and pull out my tendons to vent his anger. Su Beiji was stunned. He gritted his teeth and asked, Wait, what do you mean you stole the Princess Jing? Su Fengyan smiled and said, Her name is Pei Nanwei, one of the few great beauties of the Liang dynasty. I happened to pass by Xiangfan on my second trip and took her to Beiliang Palace. Su Beiji kicked Su Fengyan's calf. Su Fengyan didn't bicker with him. He patted the dust off and said helplessly, She's not your wife? What are you so anxious about? Su Beiji glared at him. The sallow and emaciated black-clothed Su Longxiang didn't get angry. He was born to be able to sense good intentions. Su Fengyan put away his cynicism and said softly, Don't worry. I've done enough ridiculous things. From now on, I'll only be messing around in Beiliang. Su Beiji snorted coldly. Su Fengyan quickly revealed his foxtail and said, But if a beauty comes to Beiliang to walk right into my trap, I won't refuse her. Su Beiji was about to speak, but Su Fengyan's words made him swallow his words. Why are you acting like my wife? Why do you care about this? Su Fengyan pretended to be terrified and shifted his butt. Su Juzi, don't tell me you're gay? Let me say this first, I can't wrong myself. If you can't bear it and really want to make a move, I can pay you to go to a brothel and find a young husband. Su Beiji cursed for the first time. Su Fengyan said calmly, Su Juzi, you're the first celebrity I've personally recruited. I'll arrange for Dannying to stay by your side. Ask yourself honestly, am I good to you? Su Beiji lay straight in the carriage and covered his face with the book, pretending to be dead. Su Fengyan lifted the curtain with a wicked smile and picked up a pot of green ant wine that his second sister, Su Weisheng, had purposely left behind. He sat with Huang Manor behind Blue Bird. A light breeze brushed past his face and the silver hair at his temples swayed softly. His black hair entered Beimang, and his white hair returned to Beiliang. Su Fengyan stretched and drank a mouthful of spicy wine. He didn't know why, but he remembered the sword outside the gates of hell. He softly said, frowning eyebrows erect, words like thunder, the evil flood dragon of the Swallow River is fat. Wielding a sword in the air, I'll return at the second watch. Chapter 655. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Su Fengyan and his party handed over their official documents. Probably because Liang Mang had declared war, the border patrol was a lot stricter, Then when Su Fengyan left the pass with the fish dragon gang, one of the border guards lifted the curtain of the carriage with a spear and examined every face. When he saw Su Fengyan, he was obviously startled for a moment. However, the official documents were real and there was nothing wrong with them. But the following few weapons became a thorny obstacle for both sides. Their luggage had to be carefully searched, the sword sheath, the spring and autumn sword, the spring thundersaber were all searched out. This made the tumbling horse pass's armored guards feel as if they were facing a great enemy. A few silent glances were exchanged, and a group of riders rode their horses over. Sparks flew everywhere, and the smarter Jianghu people did not dare to pass through at this time. Many of the border tea and horse businesses were also stopped. They had to avoid the sharp edge and endure this period of time before making a good plan. Su Fengyan and his party did not look like merchants, nor did they look like the children of a military family. Carrying so many sabers and swords, how could the tumbling horse pass city guards, who were already on their last legs, lower their guard? Not long after Su Fengyan stepped out of the carriage, a second group of cavalry arrived. The leader of the group was the number 1 young master of toppling horse pass, Zhou Ziru. Zhou Ziru had a good memory. When he saw this familiar face that used to belong to that small gang, he frowned. In the past half a year, the Fish Dragon gang had passed through Toppling Horse Pass several times, but nothing happened. Zhou Ziru suppressed his anger and did not act on impulse. He still remembered how his father, Shichang's deputy captain, and his sworn enemy, Captain Shui Gong, Han Tao, had bowed and scraped in front of Captain Gui Huang Fujin. After that, Huang Fujin walked down the city wall alone and rode alone to a village not far from Toppling Horse Pass. Zhou Ziru did not dare to investigate the inside story, but he did not dare to make things difficult for the Fish Dragon gang. At this time, when he saw this strange white-haired young member of the Fish Dragon gang, Zhou Ziru was also in a difficult position. If he let him go, it would be against Beiliang's military law. If he did not let him go, he would step on an iron plate. He was afraid that both father and son would be controlled by Captain Gui Huang Fujin. Su Fengyan looked at Zhou Ziru's men and horses. He was actually a real second lieutenant. With a bronze commander's seal, he could lead hundreds of soldiers. He had crossed a big threshold. He smiled and said, "Second Lieutenant Zhou, in addition to our sabers and swords, the 3 swords in the sword case can be left at Toppling Horse Pass. When I go to the provincial government office to get the letter of approval, I will ask someone to take the sword case back." Zhou Ziru nodded with a straight face. He carried his spear and rode away. Su Fengyan sat back in the carriage. Su Beiji said in a low voice, "The Beiliang cavalry does have a reason to be the best in the world." The carriage moved slowly. Su Fengyan lifted the curtain and pointed out the window. He smiled and said, "In the past, there would often be martial artists from outside the village competing in martial arts on that declining stage to gain some good luck and prestige. Now, you won't be able to see it. Generally speaking, martial artists who know some small tricks won't advertise in the local area. The people in the village know everything about the outside, so it's not easy to cheat people of their money. If they dare to open a martial arts school or school in their hometown, unless the place is too small and they haven't seen the world, their skills can't be considered too bad. The local martial arts schools in Beiliang have always been more miserable. They have to live with their tails between their legs. Most of them have to rely on the government to do things. When I went out this time, I was following a small sect that had lost power in Lingzhou. Every family has their own difficulties. However, it also gave me a rough idea. Is it possible to support a school similar to the chess and sword music school outside of Beiliang and outside of Beiliang? One in the light, one in the dark. It's interesting to think about letting the puppets under me become the chief of the Wulin Alliance." Su Fengyan might have said it as a joke, but Su Beiji thought about it seriously. He said, "The imperial court has its laws, and the Jianghu has its rules. They might not be the same. Let's not talk about how much money you have to spend. If you don't personally put in a lot of effort, can you really play it well?" Since Su Beiji was so serious, Su Fengyan didn't have the nerve to continue speaking without thinking. He followed along and said, "You can use other people's stones to polish jade. First, you can copy what the Empress of Beimang did. As for whether or not you can't acclimatize, you have to try before you know. You also know that the prince's mansion has an armory. It can make many Jianghu people with mediocre martial virtues but extremely martial fanatics scramble like ducks. In the past, they were rejected at the door. If I take the initiative to open a path, the situation will be different. You might not know, but I have a bit of relationship with the Shenyuan family in Mount Hui to the south. The new head of the Shenyuan family has a frightening ambition. I reckon that no matter how big the family property is, it won't be able to withstand her squandering. I will first try to sound her out and see if she will take the bait. Su Beiji glanced at Su Fengyan and asked, "Heir apparent wants to use this matter to test me?" Su Fengyan smiled and waved his hand. "Don't be so suspicious. With your personality of going to a dead end and your unbearably smelly scholarly aura, you're not suitable for this kind of pimping business. I will find someone else." Su Beiji laughed coldly. "You want to provoke me?" Su Fengyan shook his head and sighed. "It's good that you're recommending yourself to be a small government official. Otherwise, I would really be annoyed by you. I'm lucky to have met you now. A few years ago, when I met someone as talented and knowledgeable as you, who was also quite good-looking, I could beat down 17 or 18 of them in one go. Of course, I brought along my vicious servants and vicious dogs." Chapter 656. Su Beiji's mind wandered and he suddenly said, "Why do I feel that the future king of Shu will take another step forward? Although Western Shu has always been a place of defense, Zhao Kai himself is the leader of the forces in the western regions. If he can really kill two birds with one stone and cut off the connection between Beiliang and Shuzhou, the Zhao family's decision would be very ruthless. If Zhao Kai, who has always been an insignificant figure in the imperial court, can really gain a firm foothold in the position of king of Shu, and if the position of crown prince is always empty, I think this is not a good situation for Beiliang." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Zhao Kai is going to the western regions. It's hard to say whether he will live or die." Su Beiji frowned and said, "You can leave Beimang, but he can't leave the western regions? If there is such a thing as the son of heaven, then Zhao Kai, who is a prince, is much more suitable than you." Su Fengyan nodded and said, "That makes sense. Then I will go and kill Zhao Kai, an eye for an eye." Su Beiji was surprised and said, "Really?" Su Fengyan said calmly, "I will personally bring people there." Su Beiji began to calculate in his mind. Su Fengyan had already noticed a detail. When Su Beiji was thinking carefully, his fingers would subconsciously draw horizontal and vertical lines in the air. Su Fengyan suddenly thought of the unlucky phrase, "Extreme wisdom is bound to hurt." Therefore, Su Fengyan asked Bluebird to stop the horse and buy a basket of meat buns as a reward for Su Juzi. He had personally tasted the meat buns sold in the small shop at Tuma Pass. It was called good quality and cheap. Su Fengyan was waiting for Bluebird to return. Through the curtain, he saw a group of children jumping to the private school to study. Among them was Zhao Yusong. Su Fengyan smiled knowingly and took out a fake secret manual from the Wu family's 9 Swords ruins. He called Bluebird softly and asked her to give it to the obedient and filial child. Yusong, who was silently reciting poems, was suddenly stopped by a green-clothed elder sister. Then the beautiful elder sister handed him a book. On the cover, there were 4 big words, "The Art of the Bull." It was a divine art. How could it not be a peerless secret manual? However, the child was more shocked than excited. Moreover, although the child was young, he was very smart and knew that the Jianghu was dangerous. Moreover, his mother always said that he should not take advantage of others. Therefore, Yusong did not reach out to take the secret manual. However, some of the innocent children around him were cheering. They almost hugged the green-clothed elder sister's thigh and begged her to accept them as disciples. They thought that they could become masters in 1 day and be invincible in 3 days. Yusong refused to accept the secret manual. Even though Bluebird said that it was fake and not worth much, he still did not accept it. Bluebird, who did not have the experience of selling secret manuals, could only look at her master for help. When she looked at him, Yusong was overjoyed. He saw Brother Su. He ran to the side of the carriage and looked up at Brother Su, whose face was covered by the curtain. He smiled brightly and was about to say something when he patted his head. He carefully took out a few coins that he hid very well and went to the bun shop to buy 2 big meat buns. When he returned to the side of the carriage, he was not afraid of scalding his hands. He tiptoed and handed the buns to Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian held the curtain with one hand and took the meat buns wrapped in lotus leaves with the other hand. He smiled and said, "This is the money your mother gave you to buy the book. Aren't you afraid of being scolded when you go back?" The child shook his head vigorously and grinned. "Of course not. If my mother knew that Brother Su was coming back, she would be more generous than me. Our family is not poor now. My mother is good at embroidery and can make a lot of money a month. My mother also said that there is a place called weaving in the government and wanted to invite her to go there to make money." Su Fengnian knew that Huang Fujin must have hinted to someone. The amount of hinting was just right. He did not treat the mother and daughter unfairly, nor did he disturb their peaceful life. Su Fengnian took a bite of the meat bun and pointed at Blue Bird. He smiled and said, "This sister is my friend. I don't know if the secret manual is real or fake. Anyway, I don't need it, so I'll give it to you." If one really practiced this kind of secret manual, even if they had 100 copies, they would not be able to master it even if they worked hard for 10 lifetimes. However, it was not to the extent that they would damage their bodies. They were the most worthless introductory chants of some Jianghu sections. They outlined some stupid tricks that could be found on the streets. They could only be considered to have some benefits to strengthen the body. "Okay." The child took the secret book with a smile, and then solemnly bowed to the green bird. He said in a methodical manner, "Thank you, fairy sister, for giving me this book." The green bird, who had a distant temperament, was also amused and smiled slightly. After receiving benefits, the child with a good upbringing naturally wanted to return the favor. His eyes filled with anticipation. He asked, "Brother Su isn't in a hurry to leave, right? Come to my house for lunch? My mother will definitely be happy. She always tells me that when I grow up, I have to repay her kindness." "Heh, but my mother calls Brother Su as young Master Su." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "It's no trouble. You still have to go to the private school to study. It's the busy time of the farm season. Your mother will definitely have to work in the fields. Besides, I'm in a hurry to leave Tuma Pass, so I won't stay." The child's face was filled with regret, but he did not stubbornly insist. Su Fengnian smiled and waved his hand. The carriage continued south along the road. On the way back south, the paddy fields of Tuma Pass had already turned from the green and yellow of the Ruren Mountains to a golden yellow. In the vast expanse of golden yellow that stretched as far as the eye could see, there was a young miss dressed in simple clothing that could not hide her graceful figure bending over to harvest rice. Originally, she did not have much land in the village. After she had more money, she could not bear the boredom and bought a piece of land here. The transfer of land deeds was an extremely complicated process. She had thought that the village side would not be able to get through, but she had not expected that the government side would be surprisingly easy to talk to. It was as if they were afraid that she would not buy the land. After she received the land deed, she had been nervous for a long time, thinking that there was a trap that she had not seen through. She had worked hard to save up some money. If she was cheated again, she would slap herself a few times and scold herself for being greedy and for suffering. Fortunately, it was already the autumn harvest and harvesting of rice. Behind her, there were many piles of golden rice that were her family's food. The young miss was filled with a joy that she could not tell others. She was born in Meiji, a place that was filled with beauties. She was also an outstanding person in the surrounding 100 li. Many women who were not as beautiful as her had already become the concubines of officials and soldiers, or had been raised as canaries in large private mansions. She did not envy them. She only felt that it was very good to stay here, to stay by Yusong's side. She straightened her back and wiped her sweat. But how was their benefactor, young Master Su? Her beautiful face turned red and she softly scolded herself for being shameless. Chapter 657. They passed through the western region with the silver vase in hand. Zhao Kai walked the same path as the white-robed monk who traveled thousands of miles to the west. In Zhao Kai's party, in addition to the 200 valiant Yulin guards, There were also more than a dozen imperial bodyguards with yellow belts and golden sabers around their waists. Half of them were young men and half were old men. Any old man who was picked was an outstanding talent in the Wulin 10 or 20 years ago. In addition, there was also the female Dharma king of the esoteric sect, who was greatly valued by his majesty, and a concubine who had no children. After shaving off her 3,000 strands of worry, not only did her appearance and bearing not lessen, but it also made her face, which was hard to tell whether it was gentle or dignified, even more bewitching. She was indeed worthy of being the six-pearl bodhisattva with the 6 signs. Zhao Kai had just passed through the world's most dangerous jiangha, which was known as the Yellow Crane Flying Sword. He rubbed his butt and looked back to ask the female bodhisattva beside him, "Did the Taoist master's mansion of Longhu Mountain's beard transformation scripture go from here to the western region?" It was also said that after the old lord left 3,000 words, he turned into Buddha and crossed the quicksand to the west. Why didn't I feel any celestial aura or Buddhist aura? The woman who once led the ghosts out of Xiangfan in front of the crown prince of Beiliang and the old god of swords Li Chungang did not ride a horse. She insisted on walking like an ascetic monk. She said flatly, "There is purple chi coming from the east and going to the west. It's just that you're in the mountains and don't know the mountains." Zhao Kai snorted and pointed at his own nose. "You're talking about me? You don't say. Before I met you in Xiangfan, there was a very celestial senior in the reed marsh who praised me for my luck, second only to the princess of a fallen country in West Chu. His insight is like a torch." She ignored the prince's complacency and fluttered forward in her plain cassock. Zhao Kai subconsciously looked to the north and licked his dry lips. His face was gloomy. According to his second master, Beiliang had been entrusted to Su Xiao because he had no other choice. The Lianggan corridor was the throat of the northwest. Once the corridor was opened, the 1,000,000 cavalrymen of Beiliang could easily dive into the central plains from the Huangshui Valley like lions hunting rabbits. In fact, it was not easy for Beiliang to set up defenses. Most of the time there were no barriers along the border. For example, if it were not for the Beiliang cavalry stationed at the wasteland north of Tuma Pass, or if any of the military brigades were used to relieve the defense, perhaps it would have long been crushed by Beimang's steel cavalry into a broken bamboo basket, leaking water everywhere. Moreover, the advantages and disadvantages of Northern Mang lay in the fact that Northern Mang's territory was so vast that it was almost as vast as the entire Central Plains. This formed a thick wall in the game of Go, which was something that Northern Liang could not compare to at all. Therefore, Northern Mang could afford to lose several big games, while Northern Liang could afford to lose once and lose the whole game. Zhao Kai muttered to himself, "If Su Xiao doesn't become the local emperor, who can? Gu Jiantang? Maybe he won't even last 5 years." Zhao Kai curled his lips and rode close to a carriage. He lifted the curtain to take a look. It was the only remaining Seal General, the golden-armored man. Zhao Kai laughed. "Great Master is much more generous than Second Master." Zhao Kai put down the curtain, a haze that lingered in his heart. From mocking and slandering Buddha to destroying Buddha, Second Master, who had the potential to become the world's Buddha, had been indifferent and did nothing. In recent years, he had simply disappeared. His great master seemed to be in danger in the palace. He had no choice but to go west this time. After all, when the tree moved, the person would die. Zhao Kai, whose throat was almost smoking, swallowed hard. He thought of the peer who was destined to be his life and death enemy and said softly, "Do you dare to come and kill me?" He looked back at the sword gate, which should be the easiest place to set up an ambush. "Su Fengyan, it seems that you don't have a chance." Zhao Kai twisted his neck and sneered, "Bah! You don't even dare to go to the gambling table." Yu Chou personally sent a message to Huang Fushi. This powerful Commandant Gua Yi immediately went to Zhudao City and waited respectfully. He did not dare to alarm the local government and the garrison. He only brought a group of valiant retinues that Beiliang Palace had specially assigned to him. Huang Fushi sat alone in the carriage and thought of all kinds of countermeasures. Now, Huang Fushi's reputation had taken a sharp turn. As a top warrior of a top sect in Jianghu, he had risked his life to fight Beiliang Palace. Therefore, people in Jianghu had to give him a thumbs up and praise him as a real man. After he joined Bailiang Palace and became a lackey, people in Bailiang all scolded him as a good-for-nothing. For the sake of his promotion and wealth, he had sacrificed almost all the lives of his entire clan and smashed the golden signboard that he had painstakingly accumulated for several generations. However, the honor and disgrace of Jianghu were one thing, but the military and political affairs of Bailiang were completely different. Everyone in Yuzhou was afraid of this jackal. Huang Fuxi's official position was not low. He was the real Commandant Guai, a first-class general with real power in Yuzhou. In addition, Huang Fuxi had diligently walked through the vast Yuzhou like an old farmer checking his crops. Although the fence-sitters in Yuzhou might not have good moral conduct, they were not necessarily all good-for-nothings who only knew how to flatter. Among the many commandants who joined Huang Fuxi, there were many young men who had made great military contributions. These guys had tied themselves together with Huang Fuxi and had already grown up. The several generals in Yuzhou who had the same official position as Commandant Guai finally realized that Huang Fuxi did not come to Yuzhou purely to fish for profits, but he was determined to compete with them for military power. In the officialdom there was a carrot and a pit, and each pit was worth a fortune. When you crossed the line and wanted to take over a few more pits, it was more painful than the hatred of snatching a wife. Over the past half a year, several generals who were in cahoots with each other had teamed up to trip up Huang Fuxi. Commandant Guai also resolutely fought back. The two sides were fighting fiercely. If it were not for the war in Liangmang, they might have fought with real swords and spears. Chapter 658. Rumor had it that a general had said, "Even if you, Huang Fuxi, are the new favorite of the great general, can you not follow the rules and blindly snatch territory? Back then, I went through fire and water with the great general. Is the great general someone who likes the new and hates the old? If we really fall out, at worst, we will all be tied up and brought to the king's mansion. I don't believe the great general will favor a guy like you, whose family is as dirty as a toilet." There was a brocade box beside Huang Fuxi. Inside it was a rare folding fan carved by a famous master. Bamboo Blade City was famous for its bamboo carvings. It was popular in the city for officials to give each other books and fans. This fan cost Huang Fuxi 3,000 taels of silver. It was made by Huang Wenho of the Jinsher family. Within the bamboo fan, there were more than 10,000 words. The words were small and had the charm of a famous calligraphy. Huang Fuxi came from a powerful family in the martial arts world. When he was young, he was also an elegant young master who excelled in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. His vision was naturally top-notch. The reason why he chose the bamboo fan, other than the fan's elegance, was that Huang Wenho was praised by fans in the industry for his vision. However, Huang Fuxi knew that this old man who did not show off was a genuine martial artist. Huang Fuxi bought the fan with no less money than Huang Wenho. However, if Huang Wenho was not willing to work for him, then the 3,000 taels of silver would be the price to buy his life. Huang Fuxi intuitively felt that Bailiang's Jianghu would be taken over by someone sooner or later. He was just feeling the stones to cross the river and explore the way. It would be best if he won the bet, but if not, it was fine to spend some money. Huang Fuxi did not even care about his face and family, so why would he care about those worldly possessions that he would not bring with him when he died? Huang Fuxi smiled lightly. He had been waiting outside Bamboo Blade City for an entire morning and did not lift the curtain once. If I, Huang Fuxi, dare to go bankrupt on the gambling table, would you generals with dead wives dare to? The carriage slowly turned around and drove into the city. Only then did Huang Fuxi lift a corner of the curtain. He looked at the simple carriage in front of him and gently put it down. The carriage stopped at the entrance of an ordinary inn in Bamboo Blade City. Huang Fujin got off the carriage, leaving behind the elite retinue that would never be loyal to him in this lifetime, and quietly followed. Along the way, Lieutenant General Guai did not look sideways. They followed him to a quiet single-family residence in the backyard. After Su Fengnian sat down, he asked Bluebird to buy some dyes. His current appearance was too unbecoming. He beckoned Huang Fujin, who was standing at the door, to enter the house. The burly general prostrated himself on the ground without any hesitation, the brocade box placed beside his hand. Su Fengyan didn't pretend to be amiable and approachable. Su Beiji helped him take the brocade box. Su Fengyan opened it and took a look. With a snap, he opened his folding fan and squinted his eyes. He smiled and said, "It's a piece of art. One look and I can tell it's the work of someone from the Jinling school." Huang Wenho? Then wouldn't General Huang Fu have spent a year's salary on it? Huang Fu Jin said softly, "As long as your highness doesn't mind dirtying your hands." Su Fengyan waved his bamboo fan, feeling that it was too romantic to wave a fan in autumn. Thus, he tossed it to Su Beiji, who was quietly drinking tea at the side. Only then did he say, "Huang Wenho is very reputable in Bamboo Blade City. Don't look at him as a scholar who migrated from southern Tang to Bailiang. In these years, he has mingled well with both the black and the white. The prince's residence has a notice with his name on it. If you didn't report your name and didn't use the title of an official to pressure him, this old man might not be willing to sell you this fan, right? His fan is said to be able to exchange for a 7th-grade official in Bamboo Blade City. According to the market price in Yuzhou, how can a few thousand taels buy it?" Huang Fu Jin said calmly, "I did report my name before Huang Wenho handed over the fan." Su Fengyan asked with a smile, "Was there a reason?" Huang Fu Jin replied, "Many of the big ruffians in Bamboo Blade City have acknowledged Huang Wenho, who is proficient in feng shui, as their master. I was wondering if this local snake was tactful. After all, Bailiang is your highness's Bailiang. Since they are making a living here and are so fat, they should at least put in some effort when they need to. One cannot forget one's roots. However, your highness, please be at ease. When I went to the Huang family, I didn't pull a banner. I only calmly made 2 transactions with Huang Wenho. One was the transaction of the bamboo fan, and the other was that I took care of his adopted sons in all aspects. He gave me gossip from all walks of life. Of course, it's inevitable that there will be bloodshed when necessary. At that time, both I and Huang Wenho had spoken openly, so it can't be said to be bullying others." Su Fengyan and Su Beiji, who were still talking about that Jianghu matter not long ago, looked at each other and smiled. Su Fengyan nodded and said, "Stand up and speak." Huang Fu Jin didn't dare to be pretentious. He stood up and lowered his eyelids, looking at the tips of his feet from beginning to end. Su Fengyan smiled and said, "I'll read the secret letter you sent to Wutongyan on time when I go back. If I'm satisfied, haha, I should be satisfied." Su Fengyan smiled and had Huang Fu Jin sit down. "Commandant Guai, it's not appropriate for you to speak while standing." Huang Fu Jin shook his head and said in a low voice, "I don't dare to be impudent when I speak while standing." Su Fengyan joked, "You learned this from our Bailiang's administrator, didn't you? 3 times you see, 3 times you don't see. One of them is that you don't kneel until you see Prince Liang." Huang Fu Jin was speechless. Using words to express loyalty to His Royal Highness, whose temperament was unpredictable, was futile. It was better to do things while standing. Su Fengyan waved his hand and said, "Go do what you need to do." Huang Fu Jin retreated step by step, his palms slick with sweat, and gently closed the door. Su Beiji's eyes were almost glued to the words engraved on the fan. Without raising his head, he asked, "This is Yozhou's Commandant Guai, Huang Fu Jin?" Su Fengyan grunted and said, "How about I give you the fan?" Su Beiji said without the slightest trace of politeness, "Sure, deduct it from my salary." Su Fengyan rolled his eyes and said, "It's easy for you to say. How many years will it take?" Su Beiji carefully stared at the fragrant yellow bamboo cloud and said matter-of-factly, "Until I die." Chapter 659. After learning that Li Hanlin, who had been the chief of crossbowmen in the upper reaches, had returned from the border, and since he was not in the prince's mansion, then this kid might be in the new administrator's mansion in Lingzhou. Su Fengyan took a slight detour and entered Lingzhou, which was even more romantic than Liangzhou. In the past, every time Li Hanlin was the master of his own territory, he would entertain his friends who had grown up with him. Not once had he disappointed Su Fengyan. They would visit the best brothels, drink the most expensive wine, deal with the most domineering playboys, and flirt with the most beautiful women. Su Fengyan still remembered that other than Yan Qiji, that old-fashioned bookworm, Kong Wuxia had his first time here. After the event, the courtesan had given him a very solid red packet, which made Kong Wuxia so embarrassed that his face turned red. He was so moved that he almost wanted to marry the courtesan, who only knew a little about the ways of the world, in a sedan chair. Su Fengyan had to persuade this stupid ox not to do anything stupid. Su Fengyan's hair had been dyed black by Blue Bird, and he rode on a horse. When Su Fengyan first entered Beimang, he had paid attention to the post, the beacon, and farming. Su Beiji was the same. He only sighed. Compared to Beimang, Beiliang is still too small. If its territory was a little bigger, for example, if it could swallow up Shishu and Nanzhao at lightning speed. Su Beiji did not continue speaking. After Su Fengyan and his younger brother Huang Mana met, they did not speak much. In these years, the two brothers had spent more time together than apart. They had said most of what they could say. Those who were truly close did not need those seemingly passionate words. If they met Li Hanlin, Su Fengyan could guarantee that this brother's first words would be, "Brother Feng, Tiger Hill House? Let's go." Huang Manor had clearly grown up a lot. He smiled less and was more silent. Occasionally, there was a trace of determination between his brows. Speaking of which, it was strange. Ever since they were young, Huang Man had never been close to their second sister, Su Weisheng. One of them was extremely intelligent, as if she had a mind of her own, while the other was simple-minded, as if she had no mind of her own, so they couldn't get along. However, Huang Man and their eldest sister, Su Jihu, were only relatively close. Ever since they were young, Huang Man-er's heart had always been in sync with her older brother, Su Fengyan. This time, when Huang Man came down from Mount Longhu, he actually knew to go to Shangyin Academy to visit his second sister. He even gave his beloved tiger Kuei to Su Weisheng. This made Su Fengyan feel very surprised. Before reaching the capital of Lingzhou, he found out from the conversations of the people in the tea houses and restaurants that Li Hanlin, the great calamity Li, had a change of heart after being trampled by a warhorse. He had really earned great military merits at the border. This time, when he returned to his hometown, he did not even go to the brothel. He did not stay at home for more than a few days before leaving with his fellow soldiers. This made the frightened people of Lingzhou sigh that they did not understand the ways of the world. Of the 4 young masters of Beiliang, other than His Royal Highness, who was still frivolous, Yan Qi, who was originally somewhat talented, had gathered the relatives of the emperor. He had also benefited from Jean Lanting's resignation and became a noble Jean Lanting. Of course, this was only a small Huang family. The great Huang family had a small Huang family with enough qualifications to replace Jean Lanting. Kong Wuxia had entered the imperial army. Now, even Li Hanlin, who was endlessly spoiled by the administrator, had great accomplishments. The people of Lingzhou sighed with emotion and felt rather helpless. Could it be that, in the future, they really had to let that useless crown prince become their king of Beiliang? Since Li Hanlin was not at home, Su Fengyan did not go to the administrator's residence to disturb official Li, who had been promoted to a second-rank official. There was also Li Fuzhen, who looked at him coldly and disdainfully. It was fine if they did not meet, but if they did meet, it would be even more boring. The Fish Dragon Gang was within Lingzhou and was not far away. However, Su Fengyan did not have the leisure to flaunt his status. There were clearly many travel-worn foreign monks in Beiliang. Most of them could only stay in the various small temples. There were also quite a few who begged with alms bowls. Su Fengyan and his group followed the spacious courier road that led to the capital of Beiliang. They walked slowly and hurriedly. Su Fengyan diverged from the courier road on the border of the 2 prefectures and stopped his horse at a famous stop-horse temple. There was a rumor on the streets as to why the temple had such a strange name. Back when the Su family entered Beiliang, Su Shao and Princess Consort had stopped their horse at this temple to burn incense. It was not the 1st or 15th day of the month, and it was also noon, which was not a pleasant time. The sun was scorching hot, making it seem that there were more monks than pilgrims. The buildings of Stop Horse Temple were sharp and tall, reaching into the clouds. The eaves were scattered, and when the wind blew, one could hear the clanking of iron horses. Before entering the temple, Su Fengyan asked with a smile. Do you believe in Buddhism? Su Beiji shook his head and said, the monks in the temple are mostly infatuated men and women who boast that they have seen through the world of mortals. They are far from seeing through. This is especially true for this kind of large temple where the incense is at its peak. There are very few truly virtuous senior monks. I don't believe in Buddhism, but I don't believe in Buddhism either. I remember the Middle Agama Sutra said that there was a venerable one who had not seen a woman for 80 years. I have also been to the Buddha cave outside Dunhuang and saw many pictures of Buddhas cutting their flesh to feed tigers and sacrificing their lives to feed eagles. To me, it is really an unattainable realm. I have also been to the Taoist temple outside the Heaven's Gate of Tao De Sect to read the scriptures, but I did not feel too emotional. My grandfather said that old monks talk about Buddhism with their mouths full of alcohol. Young prostitutes earn money to buy the yellow court, and children secretly apply rouge on their faces. This kind of freedom is precious. Among the three religions, Confucianism is relatively less restrictive, so I think it suits me more. Su Fengyan smiled and said, then are you going in to burn incense? Su Beiji said calmly, it won't stop me from burning incense and praying to Buddha. After entering, Su Beiji distanced himself from Su Fengyan and the others. He held incense and prayed in all directions alone. When he lowered his head, the scholar's face was slightly sad. Chapter 660. Bodhisattvas fear the cause, while laymen fear the effect. Leaving the temple, Su Fengyan saw dozens of pilgrims gathered and whispered to each other. He didn't want to pay attention to them, but Bluebird tugged on his sleeve and he saw a familiar slender figure beside a roadside tea stall. Beside her stood a tall and slender figure. It was a scholar in a green robe, but he couldn't see his face clearly. It was said that the Taming Horse Temple's prayer for marriage was very effective. Most of the people who came here were young men and women who were not married. During the spring season, it was even more noisy and filled with incense. Su Fengyan only paused for a moment. He learned from the pilgrims that when the scholar was buying water, he handed a book to an old man. He said that the young man had a good physique and wanted to sell it to him for 3 taels of silver at a low price. Originally, this kind of local idle scoundrels were good at blackmailing people. They hired an old man and half swindled him for money. As long as they gave him a few copper coins, they would be able to get away with it. Those scoundrels didn't dare to make a big fuss and their appetites were small. It was estimated that the scholar was noble and had a proud and unyielding character. Not only did he say something that made the scoundrels embarrassed, but he also said something like reporting it to the authorities. He also threw the book on the ground, which angered a group of local bullies who were waiting to collect money. They all rushed forward and rolled up their sleeves, ready to beat him. At this time, in Su Fengyan's eyes, it was already the most exciting part of the show. When the scoundrels saw a beautiful girl beside the young scholar, their mouths were dirty. That scholar was indeed unyielding and unyielding. Everyone said that scholars were useless, but this handsome scholar took the initiative to attack. He directly punched a strong man on the nose. What followed was a disaster. He was punched and kicked by more than a dozen people. If the girl didn't lie on the ground to protect him, he would have to lie in bed for a few days before he could walk. Perhaps they were afraid of provoking the authorities, but after the scoundrels had a good time beating him, they scattered like birds and beasts. Su Fengyan had seen enough and dismissed it with a laugh. He said softly, "Let's go." Su Beiji frowned and said, "This group of idle scoundrels is so unscrupulous?" Su Fengyan held back his laughter and said, "How can idle scoundrels be good people? If you don't bully the weak and fear the strong, if you don't bully men and seize women, are you still a ruffian? But you really can't see it?" Su Beiji understood immediately and said self-deprecatingly, "Understood. After the scoundrels who were looking for money, they didn't take the opportunity to grope the girl. It's against all common sense. This was a trap set and scoundrels together." After Su Fengyan mounted the horse, he said, "I got tired of this trick when I was 13 or 14 years old." She remembered that at first, she was fooling around with a popular courtesan in Liangzhou. However, she saw through it at a glance. She just didn't say anything. Naturally, I'm not like this girl from a respectable family, crying her heart out and wishing she could give herself to him. Su Beiji shook his head helplessly. Su Fengyan said calmly, but you can't not believe it. That girl is the daughter of Beiliang's administrator, Li Gongda. That scholar made a big profit this time. He didn't spend more than 10 taels of silver, but it's more useful than writing 300 famous poems. Su Beiji turned his head to look at the girl who was helping the scholar up. She looked like a weeping beauty. Su Beiji laughed softly and said, "You're not going to expose it? Aren't you familiar with Li Hanlin? You've known her for many years." Su Fengyan said self-deprecatingly, "That would be a loss of virtue. In front of Bodhisattva, I'd break up a pair of well-matched scholars and beauties." Su Beiji urged his horse to Bluebird's side and asked for a few banknotes. Bluebird saw that her young master only had a curious expression and didn't intend to refuse. She handed over a stack of banknotes to Su Beiji. Su Beiji galloped away and stopped the group of scoundrels in the distance. He gave them the banknotes and said a few words. Then the scholar really received a solid beating. Su Fengyan rode side by side with Su Beiji. He asked, "What did you say?" Su Beiji laughed and said, "I said I'm Li Hanlin's helper. Li Degongzi has long disliked that kid. So he asked me to come forward and ask you heroes to help." Su Fengyan nodded and said, "This explanation is really watertight. The scoundrels fought without any fear of repercussions. Even if that scholar had relied on the Li family's chicken and dog to rise to the heavens as an official, when he found out about this story, he still did not dare to cry out for injustice. He had forked out money to hire someone to beat him up. It was too sullen. Are you being mean?" Bluebird smiled knowingly. Su Beiji said calmly, "Since ancient times, scholars have been the best at killing scholars." After galloping out for a moment, Su Beiji suddenly felt somewhat regretful. He asked, "We gave them more than 300 taels of silver. Isn't that too much?" Su Fengyan laughed aloud and pointed his horsewhip at this scholar, whose belly full of evil tricks was far better than the other fellow. He was starting to really admire Su Beiji. ##### first. I don't understand. Is there such a thing as number one? The monthly votes are within the rules. Everyone can fight for it. I don't have any objections. Whether you win or lose, it's your own ability. However, is it difficult for an author to quietly write a book and for readers to quietly read a book? Who's more hardcore? Who's more loyal? Who's more loyal? Who's more ferocious? You even F*King said you prepared 1,000,000? Others are fighting for monthly votes with you. Are they just shining your shoes? The little fish in the pond? You should be happy in your own group. Why do you have to make such a fuss? Fine. I'll fight for number 1. P.S. Let's talk about this month's update. 5,000 words per day for this month. Take 1 day off every week. Chapter 661. The autumn wind was chilly, and the green ant wine was in high demand. The willows at the intersection of the 2 relay roads outside the city were particularly thick and strong. Under the shade of the willows was a clean wine shop. The wine seller was an old man in his 50s. As business was getting better, he let his son and grandson, who were busy farming, come here to help with the business. Originally, it was more suitable for the daughter-in-law to do the odd jobs. After all, only a woman could put her face down and bargain with the customers. The old man was a simple man. After doing business for more than 10 years, he was still shy and could not open his mouth. However, a few years ago, his daughter-in-law had caused a disaster by offending a group of drunken and troublemakers. The old man did not dare to let her suffer. Even now, he still had lingering fears. At that time, if it were not for someone passing by the wine shop who could not stand the sight of those dandy young men in bright armor, he would not only have to pay to avert the disaster, but also his daughter-in-law's chastity. Even now, when he thought about it, the old man still felt guilty and uneasy. He felt that he was useless. Later on, when he heard that those young men who relied on their connections to join the army were probably the personal guards of the Crown Prince of Beiliang, the old man accepted his fate. However, it was a pity that the great general was like a tiger father and a dog son. When he was drunk in private, he would curse a few words about the ways of the world. He thought that when the great general passed away one day, he must not let the crown prince be the king of Bailiang. Everyone said that General Qin Jibao was invincible on the battlefield, but he was kind to the soldiers and the people. The old man and some of the old farmers in the neighborhood who were about the same age also thought that General Chen was good at fighting and would not be bad if he became the king of Bailiang in the future. Today, the old man was in a good mood and took out the homemade green ant wine that he could not bear to drink. Green ant wine was not expensive to begin with. High officials and dignitaries could afford to drink it, and the common people also did not lack the money to buy it. Only black market merchants who were blinded by greed would drink it. However, there were also good and bad green ant wine. Generally, it was sold in bulk by the caddy and by the bowl. Although the old man was kind, he was not willing to lose money and take out the mellow-aged wine. The main reason was that the old rich man who was sitting there drinking wine was his benefactor. That year, if it was not for this old man who stopped that group of lawless soldiers, his daughter-in-law would have been dragged to the barracks by those bastards. Today's jar of green ant is free of charge. In the old man's opinion, elder brother Su, who was drinking, couldn't be a rich gentleman. He was dark and skinny. He probably worked hard to earn money. However, he was dressed well. At least his clothes looked like silk and satin. It was comfortable to look at. After dealing with a table full of customers, the old man finally had some free time. He draped a wet towel over his shoulder and sat at the table next to him. He smiled and said, "Brother Su, why don't you call nephew Yuan over for a drink? I haven't seen you guys for 2 years. What's wrong? Are you afraid that I'll go bankrupt from drinking?" A tall man with a dignified appearance stood at the edge of the shade. The old man remembered clearly that he was the one who had taught those little bastards a lesson. Later, he learned that he was old brother Su's adopted son, surnamed Yuan. The old man had been selling wine here for many years. He had seen many children of rich families come and go, but none of them could compare to this young master Yuan. Old brother Su had such a good character and appearance as his adopted son. Good people are rewarded. However, today was different from the few times they had met before. Old brother Su had brought a pair of people with him. One was a young scholar, and the other was a well-behaved little girl. It was strange that young Master Yuan wasn't sitting at the table to drink. Could it be that the scholar was old brother Su's biological son and granddaughter? They didn't look alike. However, the old man wasn't a gossipy woman. He didn't mention this. The rich man waved his hand and smiled. He doesn't like to drink and is arrogant. Even if I personally persuade him to drink, he will say that excessive drinking will make things worse. His reasoning is always better than mine. I can't win against him. Brother Huang, let's just let him be. Old Huang smiled and nodded. It's fine. It's fine. Not drinking is better than drinking. Unlike young Master Yuan, my son isn't cut out for great things. He always sneakily drinks a few mouthfuls when I'm not paying attention. I'm too lazy to scold him. We're already so old. We've thought things through. The old man with the surname Su drank a mouthful of green ant wine. He took a deep breath and snorted. With a face full of joy, he said, "Brother, your words are very straightforward." The old man was happy. He laughed and said, "What do you mean by straightforward? It's all nonsense. We don't know any reasoning. We're just living our lives. My grandson went to a private school to learn how to read. I'm just waiting for him to change the word wine on the brochure. It doesn't matter if it looks good or not. It's fine as long as he can recognize it." The old man thought for a moment and said, "My son's handwriting is quite good. Why don't we use it first and change it when your grandson learns how to write couplets?" Old Huang was stunned. He rubbed his hands and said with an embarrassed expression, "That's good. But won't it be too troublesome for you?" The old man waved his hand and smiled comfortably. "It's fine. I'm here today to wait for my son to come home. When he finishes drinking, won't it be easy? It's just that I don't have a pen and ink." Old Huang slapped his thigh and said, "If you don't have it, then go get it. The village isn't far. It's 2 miles away. I'll get my grandson to go get it. That brat's legs are very nimble." There was a child who had been in the private school for less than 2 years who had been happily squatting nearby. He rested his chin on his hand and peeked at the little girl sitting at the table. He felt that she was really beautiful. When he heard his grandfather praising his legs in front of everyone, he felt very proud and smiled. Without his grandfather's instructions, he stood up and disappeared. Old Huang generously took the bowl of wine that Brother Su handed over. He took a sip and asked with a smile, "Brother, is your son a scholar who wants to take the imperial examinations?" The old man shook his head and said, "He's not very educated. However, I've been forcing him to go out for the past few years. He travels very far and doesn't stay at home for many days. Sometimes, I regret it." The old man sighed and said, "Brother Su, young people should go out and experience more. Otherwise, they won't be able to support a family. Brother, your family business is definitely not small. Unlike us who only have one mu of land our whole lives, young Master Su will definitely have to suffer more. It's a good thing." The scholar who didn't drink much smiled and raised his head to look at the end of the posthouse road. Old Huang only drank half a bowl of wine before he went to greet the other tables of customers. The tavern was a small business with a small profit margin. It was rare to have a repeat customer, so all of them were unfamiliar faces. The table of scholars didn't have loud voices, but it sounded like they were talking about the world. Old Huang couldn't understand them anyway. The table of people who had been in the Jianghu were mostly dressed in simple clothes. Among them, there was one who was dressed in brocade clothes and had a loud voice. He spoke with a foreign accent, but he was relatively generous. Other than 2 jars of green ant wine, he also ordered a few caddies of cooked beef. The tables of people didn't interfere with each other's business. The scholar talked loudly and arrogantly. Chapter 662. On the other hand, the group of Jianghu people took a few more glances at young Master Yuan, who was standing like a spear by the side of the posthouse. There was some fear in their eyes. They knew their own weight. They had come to Beiliang to make a living. They wanted to open an escort agency near Liangzhou or join a slightly larger gang. They had traveled a long way. They had left their hometown in Liaodong because they had been bitten black and blue by a mad dog who also had the surname Yuan. Their original gang had been strangled by that brat, so they definitely had some tricks up their sleeves. They were definitely not those so-called invincible fighters who fought all the way from the village head to the village head, from the east to the village head, and from the east to the village head. They were also not boxing masters who dared to call themselves grandmasters. The reason they had chosen Beiliang as a place to stay was because they knew that the king of Beiliang had brought prosperity to Liaodong. Although Beiliang had suppressed Jianghu quite a bit, at least there was some incense burning there. Furthermore, they were just a few small fish and a few small shrimps. They had not done anything against the country's laws, so it should not be difficult for them to make a living. However, since they were unfamiliar with the place, they had to be careful. They were more cautious, afraid that they would encounter an unreasonable territorial snake. They had heard about young Master Yuan from the conversation between the old man in the wine shop and the rich man. The reason they spoke loudly and deliberately talked about the heroic deeds of wandering Jianghu was because they wanted to see if they could gain the favor of the crippled rich man. It would be best if they could get a guard instructor who could guarantee a steady income. Otherwise, they were embarrassingly short of money and did not have much traveling expenses. They would not put on a facade and ask for a few more caddies of beef. A single copper coin could not kill a hero. How could they dare to rob in the territory under that butcher's jurisdiction? A scholar put down his wine bowl and clicked his tongue. The Long Xiang army penetrated deep into the enemy's territory alone and showed the might of the Beiliang army. The Great Snow Dragon cavalry even killed all the way to the northern barbarians' Nanjing prefecture. This is all true, but what does His Royal Highness have to do with this? I've heard that the Crown Prince is very confident. So it turns out that you've been strategizing in a brothel in Liangzhou from thousands of miles away. Impressive. Impressive. Another scholar from the same school who had studied the books of the sages shook his head and laughed. It's the same thing. They're both fighting on horseback. His Royal Highness is fighting on horseback when he's on a girl in a brothel. Isn't he fighting on horseback? Yuan Liang, you are underestimating our hereditary His Royal Highness. A scholar with a jade pendant hanging on his waist sneered. I'm waiting for this prince to ride the Empress of Beimang. That's true ability. When the time comes, I'll be the first to tame him." The scholar who started this said in a strange tone, "Is the age difference a little too big?" Scholar Xuanyu asked, "Isn't His Royal Highness famous for being unrestrained?" The table of scholars who were worried about the country and the people burst into laughter. Young Master Yuan, who was standing quietly in the distance, narrowed his eyes. Instantly, a strong murderous aura exploded from his body. Among the three old and young people at the next table, the little girl who knew how to be grateful looked indignant. There were tears in her eyes. The old tycoon drank a mouthful of wine and smiled. Chun Shiliang, the scholar from Jiangnan, also smiled gently. The scholar at the other table, who was wearing the most luxurious clothing, put down his wine bowl heavily. He didn't point at anyone and laughed. "I've heard that the Crown Prince of Beiliang went to Martial Emperor City and even went to the top of the city wall. Later on, he followed the old god of swords and killed his way to the king of Guangling by the Guangling River. I admit that I can't do it even if I have 100 guts. If it were someone else, let alone doing it, they would be so scared that they peed in their pants. Don't talk to me about having an expert protecting you. At this level of grudge, it doesn't matter if you're the crown prince or not. I don't believe that a crown prince who only knows how to bully women can make a sword immortal like Li Chungang escort him for thousands of miles. Can he make the second in the world, Martial Emperor City, let him go to the top of the city wall and walk out of the city?" His friend tugged at his sleeve and shook his head slightly, indicating to his brother not to let his emotions affect his decisions. Scholar Pendant Jade had a calm expression and said slowly, "Is a boorish man worthy to talk about the world's affairs? A toad opens its mouth to the sky and swallows the sun and the moon? You sure talk big." When arguing with someone, how could the people of Jianghu win against a scholar? That person of Jianghu in embroidered clothes was probably an impatient boorish man. When he heard such sarcastic remarks, he grabbed a knife on the table and immediately held down the people at the same table. Chan Shiliang finally opened his mouth and smiled. "A toad swallowing the sky and the moon is called ambition. Even if it's unpleasant to hear, it's just having high standards. But a frog at the bottom of the well looking at the sky is petty." A scholar shot a glance at this shabby scholar in white clothes and sneered, "Who do you think you are?" Chun Shiliang said calmly, "Let's not talk about me first. Even if you read a few sage books, you're not even a thing. If I were your father, I wouldn't have ridden your mother. What's the use of giving birth to you?" The little girl covered her mouth and laughed. She secretly gave Brother Chen a thumbs up. Chun Shiliang touched the little girl's head and ignored the scholars who were so angry that their chests almost exploded. The rich man glanced at the people of Jianghu and greeted old Huang with a smile. "Come, give these warriors 2 jars of green ant wine and 5 caddies of beef. Put it on my tab." "All right, Brother Huang, this money can't be less." The people at the table were not pretentious and cupped their fists to thank him. Dust flew on the road to the inn. The old man stood up and put his hands into his sleeves. He gently looked at his son, who went all the way to the north and cut off Su Huainan's head and the 5th raccoon's head. Su Fengyan turned over and got off the horse. White Bear Yuan Zuozong smiled and walked forward to take the reins of the horse. Su Fengyan smiled and thanked him. He said, "I'll drink a bowl of wine with second brother Yuan later." Yuan Zuozong nodded. The old man rubbed the head of his second son, Huang Man and then walked to the table with his eldest son. He said softly, "You've become darker." Su Fengyan nodded. After the father and son sat down, the little girl sensibly moved to Chun Shiliang's bench. She greeted the brother who had once picked up the wishing money for her and gave her a big watermelon. She shyly called young Master Su. The latter reached out and pinched her nose. He smiled and said, "Now you're much fairer than me. In the future, there will be a lot of handsome young masters lining up to admire you." At the table, the old man sat alone on a bench. Chun Shiliang and the little girl sat on another. Su Fengyan and Su Longxiang sat together. Su Beiji sat on the last bench. Yuan Zuozong stood and drank a bowl of wine. He stood back to his original position. Su Shao asked with a smile, "All right, I boasted to the tavern's owner, Brother Huang, that your handwriting is not bad. I want you to write the word wine so that I can hang it on a pole to attract customers. Is that okay? Su Fengnian drank a bowl of wine and wiped the corner of his mouth. It's okay. The little boy hurriedly brought a brush, ink, and a small piece of satin that was carefully stored at home. Su Fengnian raised his arm and wrote. But he wrote very slowly and neatly. Old Huang was naturally satisfied and thanked him repeatedly. When Su Fengnian returned the brush and ink, he stood up and said with a smile, "No need, no need." He even joked that his father must have come here many times to cheat wine. It was just a small matter. After a moment of silence, Su Xiao wanted to say something but stopped. Su Fengnian lowered his head and drank. His lips touched the edge of the bowl. He slightly raised his head and said, "I already know." Su Xiao nodded. Su Fengnian asked softly, "Are the troops ready?" Su Xiao smiled. Su Fengnian tightly pursed his lips. "I won't enter the city first. I'll go later." Su Xiao sighed in his heart. Su Fengnian drank another bowl of wine and gently stood up. Su Xiao raised his arm to Yuan Zuozong. Su Beiji bowed deeply to the old man before sitting down. While sitting down and drinking, he and Chun Shiliang looked at each other almost at the same time. They looked at each other but quickly moved away. Su Fengnian mounted the horse and galloped to the northwest. There were 800 white horses of the Phoenix Battalion ahead. They were going to kill Prince Zhao Kai. Su Xiao sat down and drank. Old Huang came closer and joked, "Young Master Su is really handsome. You don't look like old brother Su at all." Su Xiao asked Old Huang to sit down and laughed. "It's good that he doesn't look like me. If he looks like me, it will be difficult to find a wife. He looks like his mother. What a blessing." The old wine seller had a deep expression on his face. Su Xiao stood up to pay the bill. After much persuasion, he finally handed it to the old man. Before he left, he said, "Those people who caused trouble here back then were not from the Feng Battalion. I have to tell you about this, brother." Old Huang smiled. "It doesn't matter. We can't afford to offend anyone. We just want to be safe." Su Xiao said softly, "I don't know if I'll have a chance to drink here again." Old Huang said anxiously, "You're treating me like an outsider. Brother, you have a few jars of green ant wine." Su Xiao patted Old Huang's shoulder and left the wine shop. Old Huang stood at the edge of the wine shop and suddenly realized something. He turned to his son and shouted, "That word! Replace the old one and hang the new one." Chapter 663. Everyone in Bailiang knew that there was a group of elite light cavalry outside the capital city. Most of them were sons of rich families, and some of them were descendants of generals. Their father's generation didn't have a high position, and their numbers were always maintained at around 800. Due to the lack of a leader and the restriction of rules, this cavalry rarely showed themselves. Only last year did they choose 5 people from each of the 20 bids to make a total of 100 cavalry. Then, they carried back the bodies of more than a dozen of their comrades who died in battle, and brought back many boxes of martial arts manuals from a place called Mount Huey's Bull Gang. The outside world didn't pay much attention to them. His Highness had done a lot of ridiculous things over the years, wasn't it? What could a mere 800 cavalry do? Wang Chong had once asked Lieutenant Yuan Meng this question in private. Yuan Meng told him that when Chu Lushan's General Chu led his troops to Shu, he only had 2,000 to 3,000 men. Even so, he was still able to crush western Shu, which was surrounded by natural barriers. Cavalry Wang Chong's good brother, Lin Heng, died in the Battle of Xiangfan City's Reed Marsh. He was pierced through by Wang Mingyin's halberd. When they were crossing the gates of hell, they were on duty together. Lin Heng saw that person sitting at the bow of the ship and flicking his saber with his fingers. Lin Heng even said that the person wasn't just for show. Although Wang Chong's martial arts weren't as good as Lin Heng, who always said that his saber skills would be better than Gu Jiantong's, he didn't believe it at the time. Later, outside Xiangfan City, he was killed by Wang Mingyin, one of the few experts in the martial arts world. After seeing that person draw his saber, Wang Chong finally believed it. However, Lin Heng died. But Wang Chong didn't hate that person, because that day, when they faced off against King of Jing and 1,000 cavalry, That person took the lead and lightly stabbed a fierce general of the Qingzhou army to death. After that person gave the order to withdraw his saber, he didn't say anything to calm the soldiers down. He just personally bandaged Wang Chong's wound. Wang Chong wasn't a rash person. The reason why he entered the Phoenix Battalion was because his father, who had been a lieutenant in Chengdu, said that there would be a day when he could earn merits with a clear conscience. Wang Chong naturally didn't feel that he was going to throw his life away. Is my life not a life? Why should he work for you? My father isn't that bad either. After he came down from the Beiliang army, he was at least the head of a county's army. But after that trip to the pugilistic world, not to mention Wang Chong, even a ruffian like Wang Donglin had changed after returning to Beiliang. If anyone in the Phoenix Battalion said anything bad about that person, Wang Donglin didn't waste his breath. He went to the training ground and had a horse battle. He won 3 battles in a row. In the 4th battle, he used a wooden spear to poke someone off his horse. He made that person sit high on the horse and pointed the tip of the spear at his chest. Before Wang Donglin could open his mouth, the other lieutenant, Hong Shuwen, who had traveled the pugilistic world with him, flipped over and got on his horse. He then poked that person off his horse and asked him if he was convinced. Hong Shuwen was one of the most ruthless people in the Phoenix Battalion. He was outstanding in both horse and infantry battles. Even Field Officer Yuan said that this kid was a dog that didn't bark. When he bit someone, he didn't know how to hold back. Very quickly, no one in the Phoenix Battalion dared to speak ill of this young man who had never stepped into the military camp. It wasn't that they didn't want to say anything, but they didn't dare to. Damn it, Hong Shuwen had fought with a few people in private. Field Officer Yuan always said that he would punish him, but after the fight, he didn't say anything. There were even people who saw Field Officer Yuan giving special treatment to Hong Shuwen, teaching him a few spear techniques. Everyone finally understood that Field Officer Yuan had also switched sides with that fellow. Moreover, after that incident, the famous Great Halberd Ning Amei of the Beiliang army would occasionally visit the Phoenix Battalion's encampment to look for Wang Chong and Wang Donglin's cavalry. During this time, he even took in 2 anonymous disciples. Although they didn't officially acknowledge each other as disciples, it was close enough. He taught them how to throw the short halberd. When he was free, he even took out money to treat these nameless soldiers who didn't have any military achievements to drink. This made others very envious. After all, Ning Amei wasn't an ordinary character. He was one of the 4 fangs of Beiliang. He was on the same level as Dian Xiongzhu, a first-rate general who commanded 6,000 Iron Stupa cavalry. Although the hearts of the 800 people in the Phoenix Battalion were currently scattered, everyone was worthy of the Beiliang saber at their waist. In terms of individual strength, they definitely wouldn't lose to any of the elite troops in Beiliang. Especially for a bastard like Hong Shuwen who fought as if he was eating. He should have become an elite crossbowman long ago. The 800 light cavalry held their breaths and waited quietly for the arrival of that person. They only knew that they were about to embark on a long-distance raid. They didn't know who to kill. They didn't know how many soldiers the enemy had. They didn't know if they would survive after the battle. Su Xiao sat in the carriage. The coachman was Spear Immortal Wang Xiu's junior brother, Han Laozhan. Chun Shiliang and the little girl followed him into the carriage. Su Beiji was left behind to enter Liangzhou's prefectural city and follow the coachman to the king's residence. He rode on horseback, accompanied by several old retainers whose auras were as long as rivers. The carriage suddenly stopped. Su Beiji suddenly saw the king of Beiliang lift the curtain and wave at him. Su Beiji sat in the carriage. He wasn't trembling with fear, but he still felt all sorts of emotions. The hunchbacked old man in front of him and Huang Sanjia had destroyed the principles of the spring and autumn annals. They were even said to have broken the backs of millions of Confucian scholars. Su Beiji really couldn't imagine that the butcher was an old man who talked and laughed with peddlers. Su Xiao leaned against the wall of the carriage with his hands in his sleeves. He said to the grandson of his old friend, "Don't hold a grudge about Su Huainan's death. Of course, if you really want to hold a grudge, you should hold a grudge against me." Su Beiji knelt on the ground and lowered his head. Su Beiji doesn't dare. Su Xiao smiled. "You don't dare." Chapter 664. Su Beiji's back was immediately drenched in sweat, but his tone didn't change. He kept his gaze down and said slowly, "Since Su Beiji came to Bailiang, he will work for Bailiang wholeheartedly. But if you want me to have no grudges, Su Beiji is not a saint, so it's impossible." Su Xiao nodded and said, "That's true. Very good." Su Beiji was silent. Su Xiao said softly, "Let's sit down and talk. Speaking of which, we are still distant relatives. You can call me Uncle Su in the future." Su Beiji sat down cross-legged. Su Xiao asked, "This time, Prince Zhao Kai went to the western regions. As expected, the 800 Phoenix barracks will meet him at the throat between Jianghe and Lusha River. Besides a powerful Dharma king of the esoteric sect, Zhao Kai also has 200 elite Yulin cavalry and 16 imperial golden saber guards. As for the secret forces, Bailiang's spies didn't find out much. Do you think this assassination is worth it? Even if it succeeds, what are the pros and cons?" Su Beiji asked calmly, "May I ask how many soldiers in Jianghe have rebelled?" Su Xiao frowned and said softly, "Rebelling?" The old man smiled and said, "Let's do as you say. Jianghe has been a top strategic town since ancient times. Its importance can be ranked in the top 10 in the entire Liang dynasty. It has a total of 16,000 soldiers, half of which are infantry and half of which are cavalry. The 8,000 infantry are mostly former subordinates of Gu Jiantang, but there are also some subordinates of King Yen. As for the cavalry, there are 3,000 of them. They are just west of Jianghe, killing a group of bandits." Su Beiji continued to ask, "How many of the remaining 5,000 can come out in an emergency?" Su Xiao said, "More than half, still 3,000 soldiers. However, the prerequisite was that they had Gu Jiantang's tiger seal, which was the Minister of War's tiger seal. Unfortunately, I have some old subordinates on the way to the sword pavilion. They're old, and they might not be able to deliver military intelligence quickly." Su Beiji shook his head and said, "I dare say that it is not these 3,000 soldiers who will make a move, but the other 2,000. Because even if Gu Jiantang is willing to issue this order, there will be a woman in the imperial palace in the capital who will stop it." Su Xiao frowned. "Oh? Who would have the courage to do that?" Su Beiji said indifferently, "The son of the Zhao family, to be more precise, is Han Diaoxi, who wholeheartedly wants to help Zhao Kai become the emperor. It was very likely that this eunuch, who seemed to be losing his power in the inner palace, would personally come to the capital. Moreover, Han Diaoxi's actions would mean that he is truly going downhill from the imperial palace. After all, it is a taboo for the imperial family for a eunuch to participate in the struggle for the throne. Moreover, the current emperor is not a muddle-headed emperor. No matter how great the friendship he has with a personal eunuch before he sits on the throne, he can't afford to squander it like this. Even if the son of the Zhao family really wants to let Zhao Kai succeed the throne, Han Diaoxi will have to give up his position." Su Xiao nodded. "That makes sense." Chun Liangxi, who had been holding the little girl, looked down at her and smiled knowingly. She didn't know why Brother Chun was smiling, but she smiled at him out of habit. Su Beiji sighed from the bottom of his heart. "Even if the heir is determined to kill off Zhao Kai and the 200 imperial guards, I'm afraid it will be a battle of backups, like the mantis stalking the cicada." Su Xiao suddenly laughed loudly and pointed at Chun Shiliang. Then he said to Su Beiji, "You two, great minds think alike, but there are still some small differences." Su Beiji didn't look at Chun Shiliang. Chun Shiliang also didn't raise his head to look at Su Beiji. One was the grandson of the king of the northern courtyard, Su Huainan, who had high hopes for him. The other was a poor scholar who didn't even have the qualifications to be seated at the Baogua Temple's winding water-flowing goblet. Just like a woman from a wealthy family, even if she has the appearance of an ordinary person, she has the bearing of a great family. She needs to be carefully sculpted and removed from her arrogance. Only then can she slowly see her heavenly fragrance and national beauty and gradually enter the best state. Just like a beauty from a poor family, although extremely beautiful and moving, in the end, she lacks the natural bearing of wealth. She needs to be given an aura from the big picture and open up the layout. Only then can she be as round as she wishes, charming but not demonic. On the top floor of the tide-listening pavilion was a writing table. There was a piece of fine paper on which a scholar had written a few comments from Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang before his death. Su Xiao said softly, "You two are much luckier to meet Feng Yin than those scholars who met me." Su Xiao laughed softly. "In the future, I'll have to trouble you two in Beiliang. It's already difficult to establish a business and preserve one's achievements. If you really want to rely on those who preserve their achievements to fight for a new country, it'll be even more difficult." The two of them were both stunned and frightened. A rare hint of loneliness appeared in Su Xiao's eyes. "After entering the city, you two should first go to Feng Yin's grave to toast someone. He valued the two of you greatly when he was alive. Don't disappoint him. This person is called Li Yishan." A group of cavalrymen arrived with a rumble on a remote path that didn't belong to the post house. Yuan Meng suddenly opened his eyes wide, his gaze instantly burning. This general, who had been mocked by his colleagues all year round, was even trembling as he held his spear. The leader of the cavalrymen was an extremely distinguished young master. However, on his handsome face, which should have been frivolous, there was a solemn and heroic air that even the 800 white horses would find unfamiliar. There was a short knife at his waist on his left hand and a long sword on his right. The second cavalryman was the black-clothed and barefoot butcher's second son. Who in Beimang and Liang didn't know about the Longxiang army? Who didn't know about the enemy of 10,000? Su Longxiang. The third cavalryman was the white bear Yuan Zuozong, who was known as one of the top 3 in the Liang dynasty's army. This unparalleled valiant general, known throughout the world during the battle at the tomb of a concubine of West Chu, only carried a Beiliang knife, which was enough. The fourth cavalryman was a woman in green with a long spear in her hand. The fifth cavalryman was a woman whose arms were hidden in the big sleeves of a red robe and a red scarf on her head. Her face couldn't be seen clearly, but her demonic aura was eerie. Her aura didn't lose to Yuan Zuozong at all. The 5 cavalrymen passed by the Phoenix Battalion in succession. Yuan Meng was the first to turn his horse around. The rest of the cavalrymen were silent and followed closely behind. Chapter 665. In the cold and cheerless imperial palace, after the autumn rain, the autumn wind brushed the autumn leaves. The newest imperial concubine, Yan Donggu, sat under a parasol tree and told her mother-in-law some interesting anecdotes from the streets. Nothing was taboo. The relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law was harmonious, far beyond what people outside the palace could imagine. This talented woman of northern Liang, who was only slightly overshadowed by Su Weisheng, smiled as she spoke of the matter of writing a poem on a red leaf. That gentle, courteous, and thrifty, scholarly prince immediately picked up a piece of wudong leaf that had just drifted down and didn't have time to sweep it away. He stood up with a serious expression and bowed with his hands clasped in front of his chest. "Wife, please write a poem for me." Empress Zhao Ji, who was sitting to the side, was wearing a phoenix coronet. Although her appearance was average, she was extremely dignified and elegant. She was deeply respected by the emperor. For so many years, they had treated each other with respect. In addition to working diligently, the emperor of the Zhao family would occasionally personally draw her eyebrows when he was in the mood. As for Zhao Ji's method of managing the harem with both strength and gentleness, it really made all the favored concubine's hair stand on end. Not long ago, there was a concubine who was banished to the cold palace. She washed her face with tears every day in the Changchun Palace and secretly spent 300 taels of gold to buy an extremely sentimental poem. In the end, it was the empress who personally delivered it to the emperor. Zhao Ji looked at the small squabbles between the princes and imperial concubines, and the corners of her mouth turned up slightly. She glared at her son, who was seen as the one with the least ancestral spirit among all the princes. She was imposing without being angry, but her tone slightly revealed the secret of heaven. "You are not proper. You are much less talented than your own wife. You also do not know how to improve." The prince, who was famous in the capital for his elegance, said helplessly, "A woman's virtue is to have no talent. Mother, you should teach Donggu a lesson. She is full of talent." She is more than qualified to be the chancellor of the Imperial College or the Dehuang sect. Yan Dongwu copied Zhao Ji and glared at her husband, who spoke without thinking, and pinched him under the table. Zhao Ji reached out and slapped her son's forehead. Are you scolding me indirectly? Or are you scolding me and Dong Yu together? When the prince smiled, his handsome face would be filled with a heartwarming warmth. It was very warm and intoxicating. Such an elegant man, born in a royal family, could make the noble ladies in the capital go crazy for him. Back then, he married the Bailiang girl, Yan Dongwu, who happened to be the daughter of a Bailiang civil official. It really made the entire capital feel incredulous. However, reality proved that the two of them were a perfect match. Yan Dongwu had appeared at the palace banquets several times, and no one could find any fault with him. This made many old foxes who had lived in the capital for a long time feel gratified. The prince held Yan Dongwu's cold hands and faced Empress Zhao Ji. He smiled and said, I have scolded both of you. Both of you are very talented. You are also a good-for-nothing who brought shame to my mother. You are the two women I love the most in the world. I love my mother more when I am with my mother. When I am at home, I love my wife more. Zhao Ji joked. If Fengya heard this, let's see how you deal with it. The prince sighed sadly. This stupid girl. I have been worried for nothing for 20 years. These years, she has come to find you more often than I have. Zhao Ji said calmly. When she gets married and suffers some hardship, she will know who really cares for her. The prince shook his head and said, I can't bear for her to suffer. It hurts so much. Zhao Ji smiled again. Your wife is still here. You don't need to think before you speak. How can you love your sister for a lifetime? Besides, it is useless to rely on your love. Yan Dongwu said softly, Princess Sui Zhu's personality is really good. Zhao Ji nodded. The prince reached out and held a yellow leaf. He sighed. It is so cold in autumn. Thunder rumbled in the gloomy sky without warning. The prince frowned and said, It sounds like winter thunder. Zhao Ji, who liked the clean scene in her field of vision, gently brushed away a leaf that had just left the branch on the table. She raised her head and squinted at the west. The prince listened to the thunder and smiled as he quietly threw away the autumn leaf in his hand. After Su Xiao granted him the title of king, Gu Jiantang, who destroyed the spring and autumn kingdoms, took charge of the Ministry of War with the rank of first-rank general. He was one rank higher than the other 5 ministers and became the nominal head of the military in the Liang dynasty. Apart from the 6 vassal kings in the imperial court, only Grand Secretary Zhang Julu and the leader of the remnants, Sun Shiji, were on par with him. Last year, he rushed to the northern border of the empire to personally take charge of all border matters and rarely participated in court meetings. However, no one dared to write a memorial to remove the title of Minister of War because they empathized with Great General Gu's hard work. The Ministry of War was still the watertight general's camp of the Gu party. As a first-class important minister of the border, as well as the leader of Gu's party, apart from his previous night duty in the palace, Gu Jiantang almost never had any private contact with Zhang Julu. When he returned to the capital this time, he made an unprecedented visit to Grand Secretary Zhang's residence, doing so openly, not caring if the emperor suspected that the civil and military officials were of the same mind, or if the other officials in the capital were in cahoots with each other. This type of official taboo that the powerful ministers of previous dynasties feared like a tiger on Gu Jiantang's side, it became a trivial matter. The great general came out in casual clothes, even bringing along the newly appointed guerrilla officer Yuan Tingshan, who might be his adopted son or son-in-law. On the same street, there were many pairs of eyes staring fixedly from behind the doors of most of the important ministers' residences. When Minister Gu walked out of the blue-eyed Grand Secretary Zhang's residence in large strides, they quickly reported to their masters who were waiting for news. No more, no less, exactly an hour. It wasn't even enough time to drink 2 pots of tea. What kind of important military and state matters could be discussed? After entering the mansion, Yuan Tingshan, who had been wandering around aimlessly, followed the great general into the carriage. He didn't find any clues from this world's #1 bladesman's face. His expression was as indifferent as a white steamed bun, making Yuan Tingshan, who wished for nothing more than a heavenly thunder and earthly fire fight, feel extremely regretful. Yuan Tingshan had an impatient temperament where he couldn't sit still for even half a moment. The silent carriage made him pass his days and years. As soon as they drove out of a street where every door had a dynasty's great bodhisattva sitting inside, he couldn't help but ask, "Great General, what is going on?" Gu Jiantang didn't pay him any attention. Chapter 666. Yuan Tingshan normally acted like he was number one under the heavens in front of everyone, but in front of Great General Gu he was a bit better, not daring to act rashly. After all, deep down, he still sincerely admired this future father-in-law who had both military achievements and martial strength, yet was powerless. Originally, the one he worshipped the most was that king with a different surname, the butcher Su Xiao. Later on, in Gangnam-do, he tried to assassinate the widow Su Xiao, but was seriously injured by that young immortal who could sever fate with a sword. He felt like there was no longer any good karma between him and Su Xiao in this life, so he turned his attention to Gu Jiantang. Yuan Tingshan could only mutter, "If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. I don't feel like guessing." Gu Jiantang calmly said, "You don't need to worry about the northern Jianghu. I will send you to Ji Province." Yuan Tingshan's brows furrowed tightly. Ji Province? The old nest of the valiant martyr Han family? I heard they were executed for the sake of Grand Secretary Zhang's prestige. Great General, at the time you also contributed quite a bit, right? Gu Jiantang gave Yuan Tingshan a look out of the corner of his eyes. The latter shrunk his neck, saying quietly, "Either way, there isn't a single official who isn't vicious and merciless. How many people have I killed? Compared to you all, it's nothing." Gu Jiantang's tone didn't fluctuate at all. "When you arrive at Ji Province, you don't need to report to me when you kill people. When you arrive at the imperial court, I will help you stop the impeachment." Yuan Tingshan was pleasantly surprised. "Really?" Gu Jiantang closed his eyes. Yuan Tingshan said with a laugh, "When there is a great battle to fight, you better not let this old one get promoted to a high official, or else when the time comes, Bailiang won't be able to bear the consequences. This old one has a death grudge with that surname Su and His Royal Highness." Gu Jiantang closed his eyes, saying with a sneer, "Just based on you?" Yuan Tingshan's hands held the back of his head, leaning against the carriage wall, his expression gloomy. "That day will come. Let's see whose blade can take more lives." Gu Jiantang slowly said, "There might not necessarily be a chance." Yuan Tingshan said in shock, "Great General, what do you mean by these words?" Gu Jiantang put on a fake smile, which made the fearless mad dog Yuan feel a chill run down his spine. "Sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. But this time, those sitting on the mountain will all come down the mountain." As the throat of the dynasty that controlled the West, Jiang'a housed a sizable number of war elite troops. They had both infantry and cavalry, and the 8,000 infantry were mostly mountaintop powers from the Spring and Autumn War. Most of them were the old subordinates of General Gu Jiantang, and the King of Yen was slightly fewer. The 8,000 cavalrymen were in a complicated situation where three parties were vying for supremacy. Among them, 3,000 cavalrymen were orphans without parents. The leader, Wang Ji, was a general who rose to his position after the spring and autumn period. He often led 200 to 300 elite cavalrymen into the hinterlands of the western regions to hunt. His hands were so bloody that they were almost black, and he was not very popular among his peers. Currently, he was leading 3,000 cavalrymen to kill a group of highland bandits. Other than that, although the general in charge of the 3,000 cavalrymen was not a member of the Gu party, he was a relatively orthodox member of the Ministry of War. He relied on his connections in the capital to climb up the ranks. He belonged to the foreign faction of the Sword Garret. The remaining 2,000 cavalrymen were born and raised in Sword's Gate. Cavalry General He Yen had always been a fence-sitter, and he had been living a difficult life. He did not have many men under him, and he had such a spineless leader. Although the 2,000 cavalrymen were strong, they could not gain much from him. What was strange was that the various factions of the Sword Garret were intertwined with each other, and these 2,000 cavalrymen were not willing to cross the wall. The Gu party's General Ruan Daiqing was the nominal commander of the Sword Garret. Today, he watched as the 2,000 cavalrymen left the Sword Garret without permission. He had already cursed the 18 generations of He Yan's ancestors in the barracks. He was about to ask his trusted aide to write an impeachment report to the Ministry of War, accusing He Yan of leaving the Sword Garret for no reason. But when Ruan Daiqing was about to finish the report, he stopped. He Yan was the most cunning and slippery person. Why did he suddenly take the wrong medicine? Earlier, when he had personally gone to intercept them, the 2,000 riders had charged straight out of the city. They had the arrogant attitude of wanting to kill anyone who blocked their way. This made Ruan Daiqing almost think that there was a mutiny and could only avoid them. At the time, he was only glad that he had caught something on them. Now that he thought about it, Ruan Daiqing calmed down and his abacus sank deeper. He picked up the memorial from the desk and slowly burned it with a match. He said to the startled scholar, "Change it to a secret letter. Find a trusted courier and send it 500 miles to the capital. Personally hand it to the minister." At this time, a dusty man with a clean face and no beard broke into the tent. Ruan Daiqing was angry at the incompetence of his guards. But when he saw the man's face, he was surprised and nervous. He was about to say something to please the man, but the eunuch stomped his feet and pointed at Ruan Daiqing's nose and scolded, "Useless thing! Why didn't you stop He Yan's 2,000 cavalrymen?" Ruan Daiqing was stunned. He was thinking about how to remedy the situation. The eunuch who served the empress for many years in the palace waved his sleeves and left. He left a sentence that made Ruan Daiqing's legs go weak. "Ruan Daiqing, you'll be kicked out of the sword pavilion. Useless." The baffled Ruan Daiqing stood rooted to the ground. After a long time, he came back to his senses. There was no third person in the tent. This general with real power only dared to curse in his heart. "Son of a bitch, do you have balls?" Outside the sword gate, 2,000 cavalrymen galloped like a flood. In the distance, there was a man with a head full of silver hair. He was wearing a bright red coat because of the gallop. He was extremely arrogant. He had stopped Chao Chongqing 3 times in the Liang Palace. Once, the eunuch was only 100 steps away from His Majesty. But he was still stopped by the head of the eunuchs in the world. Previously, when Bai Hu came out of the Bailiang Palace to get married, it even alarmed the king of Bailiang. Su Shao asked with a smile, "She's married already?" Bai Hu said calmly, "Take a breather. I'll be back soon." Su Shao put his hands in his sleeves naturally and asked, "It doesn't count, right?" Bai Hu nodded. "Of course." On this day, Nangong Push, who was known as the most beautiful woman in the world, left Liangzhou and disappeared. Almost at the same time, in the vast western region, a horse was riding slowly. The man in white held a dark purple spear in his hand. The spearhead was not inlaid, making the spear look more like a stick. The name of the spear was Plum Wine. Chapter 667. He rode in the front. The hot wind in the desert blew against his face. The rope on his cloak gradually loosened and then fell into the yellow sand. It revealed a shocking, bright-colored python robe. The eunuch was followed by 2,000 cavalrymen of the Sword Garret a full mile behind him. There was an iron law in the Liang dynasty that was clearly engraved on the dragon steel. No eunuch was allowed to leave the palace. After the Liang dynasty became peaceful, there were only a few exceptions in the past decade or so. The first time was when Princess Sui Zhu sneaked into Beimang. After the head eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate returned to the palace, he died not long after being entangled by his red threads. Another time was when he went to pick up the emperor's illegitimate son Zhao Kai. Even though it was the emperor's order, he still used half of his friendship. Mobilizing the 2,000 cavalrymen behind him that were only loyal to the royal family was still a quiet move by the emperor on the chessboard of the world. He also used half of the remaining friendship between master and servant. But Han Shangxian, the most powerful official whose real name was very unfamiliar in the court, didn't regret it, let alone think about the emperor's fickleness. The human cat Han Shangxian was greedy for power. Otherwise, he would not have held power alone for so many years. However, he knew who he was greedy for. Back then, when the emperor was still the weakest prince, He was willing to die for the emperor. When the emperor sat on the dragon throne and had children, Han Shengxian chose to call him Great Master Zhao Kai from the very beginning. Han Shengxian was the son of that gentle woman. Han Shengxian had eaten a few meals personally cooked by her. He was not the least bit despised by her as a eunuch. The world bullied me, Han Shengxian, once. I will bully you all my life. If she respected me, I'll respect her 1,000 feet. She died early, so Han Shengxian repaid her kindness to Zhao Kai. Han Shengxian was never educated and didn't know many words. He also never cared about national laws or human relationships. The emperor and the prince Zhao Kai were the only rules. Han Diaoxi only cared about these two family rules in his life. Spurring his horse forward, Han Diaoxi saw the dense cavalry formation in front of him. The old eunuch, who did not carry any weapons, raised his hands and twirled 2 strands of silver hair hanging down from his temples. His hands were bound by 3,000 red threads. Once he killed all the rebels and traitors that the Beiliang had cultivated, he would be able to hand the job over to He Yen. Han Diaoxi could have easily killed the head eunuch of the Hall Directorate, who went to the sword garret to stop him from mobilizing his troops. However, the Catman did not have any ill feelings towards the Empress, and he did not want to embarrass his young master in the future. Therefore, he had a falling out with her too early. Thus, he allowed Ruan Daicheng to go to the Sword Firmament Pavilion and look for the good-for-nothing Ruan Daicheng. He charged towards the 3,000-strong cavalry without slowing down, still in the mood to smile and say, "Black monk, don't let our disciples die here. Otherwise, as the great teacher, this old servant will tear you apart even if it means risking my life." Wang Ji, the cavalry general on the opposite side, did not relax even when facing Han Diaoxi. Not only because he had guessed the identity of the old eunuch, but also because he knew what he was doing. Treason. Wang Ji lowered his head and touched the saber that he had kept for many years. The 3,000 cavalrymen behind him did not recognize Ruan Daicheng, the commander of the sword garret. They had been fighting for many years and had even forgotten about the son of the Zhao family. His father was placed in the sword garret by Great General Su as a garrison general. Before his death, he had gathered 1,000 trusted subordinates, and in 10 years, he had gained 2,000 cavalrymen. Among them, 300 were from Beiliang who had slowly infiltrated the sword garret. Most of them were 15 or 16 years old youths. Last year, 80 of them came in one go. In the quicksand of the western regions, 800 miles away from the Sword Gate Pass, Wang Ji saw the human butcher for the first time. Wang Ji knew that it would not be long before he could use his father's treasured saber, the Beiliang saber. Wang Ji tilted his head and spat on the ground, silently pulling out the Beiliang saber. 1,000 cavalrymen retreated abnormally, while 2,000 began to charge. This was an interception that risked countless lives to stop a finger-profound level expert. Wang Ji still wanted to become a famous governor of the border, a great general who could intimidate the Great Desert. If he really died here, he would definitely regret it. But since he was reincarnated and had the same surname as his father who used to be a Beiliang soldier, he had no regrets. The plum wine was in his hand. The man who did not drink took the water pouch from his waist and drank a mouthful. Some people said that he was the best general who could turn something rotten into something magical since the emergence of large-scale cavalry battles. He was invincible in cavalry battles with more than 100,000 soldiers. Even the current emperor praised him as the white-clothed warrior immortal who could not be compared to all the other officials in the court. In the army of the Liang dynasty, who was the best in martial arts? Originally, most people said that General Gu Jiantang was better. Since he fought 2 battles with Beimeng Hong Jingyan and the ancestor Bronze Man, he had become the new immortal of spears, vaguely surpassing Gu Jiantang who had extraordinary saber skills. Chun Jibao stopped his horse and turned around. A small group of cavalrymen followed behind. The horses under them were exhausted after a long chase. They saw the leading woman with a sword on her back, covered in dried blood. Chun Jibao's bitter smile flashed across his face. Chapter 668. He turned his horse around and lightly tossed the water skin to her. Unfortunately, she didn't catch it. The two of them were 50 paces apart. Chun Jibao laughed. You guys don't even consider physical strength. Even 2,000 riders may not be able to stop me." The woman who hadn't slept for 2 days said coldly, "The 600 iron Buddhas that Dian Xiongzong deployed and the 800 crossbowmen sent by Wei Fuqing are all dead. They're really promising. They're all wearing Beimang armor." Chun Zhibao said lightly, "What's the point of killing them? They didn't rebel. They just happened to appear in the western regions." Su Weisheng calmed his breathing. Chen Zhibao wasn't in a hurry to make a move. He still reined in his horse and stopped. The end of his spear pointed at the yellow sand under the horse's hooves. "I didn't expect you to come. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done this." Su Weisheng said sarcastically, "There's a battle that Chun Zhibao didn't expect?" Chun Zhibao said indifferently, "I did, but I didn't want to admit it. I don't know why, but every time I think of a situation that I don't want to happen, it always happens. There's no exception this time." Su Weisheng asked directly, "Are you really going to rebel against Beiliang?" Chun Zhibao tilted his head slightly and asked back, "Who said so?" Su Weisheng didn't want to talk anymore. He gently breathed in and out, the ancient sword on his back trembling. Chun Zhibao still didn't show any signs of lifting his spear. "When I was young, I didn't want my father to die for my adoptive father. In the end, he took 62 Qin family members to bring up the rear without saying anything. He still went. The second time, I didn't want His Royal Highness to refuse to enter the capital to be the prince consort. He didn't go. Last time, I didn't want him to return from Beimang to Beiliang alive. He survived. This time, I didn't want to see you, but you came." Chun Zhibao finally mentioned the plum wine. "All these years, I didn't do anything. I just wanted my foster father to slowly grow old and die in the position of king of Beiliang. Now, I still don't want to be a disloyal and unjust traitor. So, even though I knew that His Royal Highness had gone out 3 times, I still stood by and watched. The last time I didn't want to do anything. It just had to appear again." Chun Zhibao bent down and took out a spearhead from his hanging pouch. He inserted it into the already incomplete plum wine. When he lowered his head, the man in white said slowly, "I know that the maid in Wutong'an, Blue Bird, is the daughter of Spear Immortal Wang Xiu. I knew that the instant spear was left in the armory. She was groomed to be a death warrior, to be used to kill me in the future. I was very clear about that. Su Weisheng, since you are the death warrior who has been hiding for more than 20 years, I, Chun Zhibao, will let you die today. After all, the last man you saw before you died was me. I will take your corpse to Western Shu and be the Princess of Shu for 10 years. This group of horses held the silver bottle that was about to overturn the current power structure in the western region. They actually stopped their horses heading west. The place where they stopped was between the Sword Garret and the quicksand. Behind the group of horses was the Iron Gate Pass recorded in the Spring and Autumn Chronicle. The pass was built by the Emperor Qin. The cliff was like an axe, and the stone was like iron. This was a steep canyon that was 20 miles long upstream of the Jiao River. It was an important passage from the western region to the eastern region. Every time the situation in the Central Plains was stabilized, they had to pass through the north and south of Tianshan. The armored soldiers of the Central Plains had to pass through this place. Every time the horse galloped to the west, it symbolized the power of the Central Plains. Every time they retreated to the east, it meant the collapse of the Central Plains. Prince Zhao Kai got into the carriage and sat on the coachman's seat. The talisman general in golden armor stood guard beside him. When he saw a dusty old monk in black coming from the north, he smiled brightly. It was his second master, the sickly tiger Yang Taisui. When the old monk saw that Zhao Kai was safe and sound, he felt relieved. He did not say a word to his disciple, who had the potential to become a Buddha and stop the process of destroying Buddhism. He only put his palms together and bowed to the Bodhisattva. Then he silently turned around and headed east. Less than half a mile away, with a saber and a sword, Su Fengyan urged his horse straight to the Iron Gate Pass. Any prince could rush to the western region to accumulate merits and pave the way for his future ascension to the throne. They could also allow a prince to be the king of Shu who broke the ambush line of Beiliang and Nanzhao. However, A prince could not be the king of Shu after achieving great merits and then sit on the throne by destroying Beiliang. Moreover, this prince was Zhao Kai, the one Li Yishan wanted to kill. In front of him, an old monk rushed toward him. Using the great Buddhist supernatural power, he kept whispering to the hereditary king of Beiliang, Su Fengyan. Anyone can die. I 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 can die. My 216 retainers can die. Only Zhao Kai can't die. I can escort Zhao Kai back to the capital and go to the Beiliang Palace to ask for forgiveness. If you insist on killing Zhao Kai, who has the emperor's order and is blessed by fate, do you know what will happen to you? The old monk floated over. F***ck off. Su Fengyan, who had always been able to remain calm in front of his enemies, suddenly had bloodshot eyes. He angrily said, Yang Tai Sui, the first person I'll kill today is you. Do you still remember the white clothes case in the capital? I would rather die in the process of practicing my saber than be a useless king of Beiliang in the future. I want to kill you bastards with my own hands. Chapter 669. Chun Jibao was in the front when he left the small manor surrounded by willows, followed by the tide-listening pavilion with Bai Hu-er's face. Su Shao came to this quiet manor without a tree outside the outer wall. Most of the servants in the manor already knew that there was such a person who could make General Chun, who did not like to joke, become abnormal. After sending the old man away last time, he was obviously in a good mood. Some time ago they were still guessing if the old man could be the administrator Li Gongda, but they felt that it did not seem like it. Sir Li seemed to have a bad reputation. With General Chen's temper and status, he would not deliberately flatter him. After guessing, they could only think that it was most likely an old general who had retired from the Northern Liang army. Perhaps he was General Chen's old subordinate. Only the old manager of the manor guessed the truth, but he did not dare to spread it. This time, the Prince of Northern Liang came in person, and the old steward did not spend much effort. He still received him under the shade of a tree in the backyard and asked Lu Xi, who he had met before, to bring him the fruits and snacks made by the manor. After Su Shao ate a little, he stood up with a smile and asked the maid to lead him to Chun Jibao's study. The young girl, Lu Xi, did not dare to make a decision on her own, but she could not directly say that General Chen's study was not cleaned by the maids. It was all done by the general himself when he came to the quiet manor to recuperate. Being influenced by what he saw and heard, it became an unwritten rule that the servants did not go to the general's study. Even if the door of the study was open all year round, even if it was covered in dust, no one would go. The maid was in a dilemma. The steward, who was waiting quietly in the distance, quickly trotted over and personally led the general to the study. When they reached the door, the old steward quickly walked away with the suspicious maid, Lu Xi. Su Shao crossed the threshold with his hands behind his back and walked to the study desk. He saw a blank piece of paper on it. When a woman married and left home, she would bring her dowry. When a man went out, he did not marry into anyone's family. Naturally, he would be alone. The lychee finally left the branch. Su Shao put the paper in his sleeve and said softly, "This is good." Su Shao looked around. The bookshelves were filled with precious military books and historical records that had been collected. They did not use red sandalwood and yellow rosewood as bookcases to collect them. It was obvious that they wanted something that could be flipped through and read at any time. Su Shao was in a daze for a while and thought about the past. He remembered that Jibao was a very naughty child when he was young. He liked to ride on Brother Chen's neck and pull his beard. When he was young, Su Shao himself often carried him around the barracks. This little bastard was full of bad ideas. He would hold it in before he was carried, but when he was halfway through, he would piss. Since when did he become so taciturn? It was probably on the day that Jibao knelt at the tomb and buried his head in the yellow soil. Even Su Shao did not know whether the child cried or not. Later, the Beiliang army began to grow. Their iron hooves broke the gallbladder of the 6 kingdoms. Afterwards, they were ordered to enter the capital. Before the father and son met the emperor, Su Shao had a frank conversation with him. He asked if he wanted to go to Beiliang and become a king with a different surname. He, Su Shao, could retire in the capital and become the Minister of War. Chen Jibao would go to Bailiang and become the only king with a different surname. He would control the throat of the Northwest for the dynasty. At that time, the emperor also had the same idea. However, that time, Chen Jibao did not agree. He said that the capital was not safe and he was not at ease with his foster father being his hostage. Later on, when they arrived at the imperial court, the emperor probed again, whether intentionally or not, asking Chen Jibao if he was willing to work together with the king of Yen to wipe out the barbarians in the south for the imperial court. This was practically establishing two kings with different surnames, scaring all of the civil and military officials until their faces turned pale. Even Gu Jiantang, this type of great general who was extremely good at maintaining his composure, immediately flew into a rage. He abruptly swung his sleeves and turned around. The king of Yen raised his head to look at the roof beams of the great hall, not saying a single word. The old Grand Secretary, the current Grand Secretary Zhang's respected teacher, the leader of the civil officials, knelt on the ground and did not get up, continuously kowtowing until blood flowed endlessly, admonishing the emperor that he could not go against the rules and bestow rewards. That year, white-clothed Chen Jibao was only 17 years old, Su Fengyan only about 8 years old. During these years, Su Shao began to be unable to see through what this foster son of his wanted, unable to understand where his bottom line was. The more Chen Jibao had no desires, the more prepared he was, the more Su Shao didn't dare to easily die of old age. It was because the butcher knew that once he died, Chen Jibao, who didn't seem to fight for anything, would be able to obtain everything. When that day truly arrived, a Bailiang between the cracks might not be able to satisfy Chen Jibao's appetite. Back then, why did the newly ascended Zhao family son of heaven confer Chen Jibao the title of vassal king? On the surface, he was magnanimous, rewarding meritorious service, not minding the two kings of different surnames cooperating with each other in the north and south. But wasn't he also trying to have the father and son mutually restrict each other? Su Shao didn't doubt at all that the independent Chen Jibao didn't want or couldn't contend for the throne under the heavens. Su Shao walked out of the manor, muttering to himself, "I hope there's still time for both sides." He returned to Bailiang Palace. In the great hall, there were no armored guards or murderous auras. Half of the 6 adopted sons had come. Qi Dangua, who carried the banner, Yi Shizhen, who studied under Yang Kai Zhao Chongling, and Yao Jian, who was skilled in green bag geomancy and dragon-seeking. Chen Jibao, Yuan Zuozong, and Chu Lushan were no longer in Bailiang. Only the 4 of them were left. Seeing their adoptive father gently sit on the chair, Yi Shizhen and Yao Jian exchanged a look and slowly knelt down. Qi Dangua didn't move. He glared at his 2 brothers who had succeeded long ago, his face full of anger. Su Shao put his hands in his sleeves, leaned back and said, "Our Bailiang spy agency has been divided into 2 in these years. Lu Qiu'er is in charge of one half, Shizhen is in charge of the other half. Not long ago, 2 people spent 1,100 caddies of gold to buy a life, hiring a blind woman called Xue Songguan to kill Fengyan. Shizhen, your 500 caddies was the first move, the death. Lu Qiu'er's 600 caddies was the last move, the purchase. Because this blind female zither player did not go back on her words after taking the money, Lu Qiu'er's 600 caddies was a loss, but she stopped when she was needed. Whether or not Feng Nian could survive in the northern Mang, he still had to give it his all. I know that Chongling had a good opinion of Ji Bao before he died. He felt that if he could control the Bailiang cavalry, not just unifying the spring and autumn period, he could even eat up Beimang in the future. Chongling was a peerless scholar who did not play tricks. He never concealed his thoughts in front of me. Before he died, he held my hand. His last words were that Ji Bao could become a great monarch like the Qin emperor. So Shizhen, you inherited Chongling's will. In these years, I could not find out who did not do it personally, and I did not want Lu Qiu'er to find out. But I know who was adding fuel to the fire. Also, this was Ishan's original intention for me to hide. I do not blame you for this. Shizhen, you just wanted to fight for your master, prove that Li Yishan was wrong, and prove that Li Yishan was not as good as Zhao Chongling. In these years, the hearts of the old subordinates of Bailiang have been scattered, especially those old people who urged me to become emperor. They still have resentment that has not dissipated. As to you, Yao Jian, you always believed in Huang Longshi's words about the white-robed man slaying the boa dragon. You were stubborn from a young age and wanted to become a state teacher like Beimang's Qilin spiritual master. You also had the great ambition of continuing the orthodoxy of the world. If I had advised you openly, the relationship between father and son would have been long gone. You would not have been able to run all over Beiliang with Fengnian in those years, so I endured and did not say anything. Su Shao was really old. He put his hands on the back of the chair and slowly stood up from the chair. The young general who was not afraid of fatigue and death every time he took the lead was actually so difficult. In the end, he said, "Now it's hard for me to say that I'm definitely right and you guys are wrong." Su Shao walked out of the hall. Qi Dangua was guarding the door with his back to Yao Jian and Yi Shizhen. Yi Shizhen was the first to stand and stumbled over to pick up the jug of wine his foster father had left behind. He held 2 wine cups in one hand and raised the jug to his nose with the other to sniff. The tearful scholar smiled and said softly, "See, I told you it was green ants, but you had to bet with me that it was yellow wine. Yellow wine needs to be warmed. You do not find it troublesome, but I do." Yao Jian did not stand up and just sat cross-legged. Yi Shizhen sat in front of him and poured 2 cups of wine. Yi Shizhen raised a cup of green ants and used his sleeve to wipe his tears. He said with a smile, "What, old Yao, you are not willing to part with your rooms of books?" The expressionless Yao Jian gripped the wine cup and shook his head. "What is there to be unwilling about? It is good to leave them for Fengnian. In the past, he liked to steal books when he was young. This time, he does not have to worry about being scolded by me. Whether I live or die, I am only one person. But you, on the other hand, are you not worried about that family?" Yi Shizhen laughed out loud. "Of course I am. Do you think I do not trust foster father in this matter?" Yao Jian nodded. Yi Shizhen raised his cup to Yao Jian. "Shall we have a toast?" Yao Jian rolled his eyes. "No, you have never been good at drinking your whole life. When did you not have a few caddies of wine under your feet during a celebration? It was all wasted by you. Clinking cups with you would be a disgrace." The scholar Yi Shizhen covered his face with his sleeve and drained his cup in one gulp. Yao Jian drank his cup at the same time. He closed his eyes and whispered, "It is a pity there is no food to go with the wine." The two drank their cups of wine and then knelt in the direction of the door. Standing at the door, Qi Dangua rubbed his eyes. He looked at his foster father leaning against a large red pillar outside the door. Qi Dangua closed the door and walked to the old man's side. He squatted down and said hoarsely, "I do not understand why they are thinking so much. Is it not good to live well?" Su Shao seemed to be tired of standing. He sat on the steps and said softly, "Foster father does not know. The people who can tell me the answer, like Chongling and Ishan, have all left." Chapter 670. The Iron Gate Pass between the quicksand of the Sword Garret gathered the best masters in Jianghu in the past 100 years. The number of masters was enough to shake the Jianghu of Liang and Beimang. Almost all of them had the mentality of fighting to the death. This was very different from when Chao Chongqing and Dong Tai went to the top of the martial emperor city. At that time, there were many hidden masters, but only 2 people actually fought. They just watched from the sidelines. Compared with the Iron Gate Pass, which was extremely strange to the Jianghu of the Central Plains, it was a far cry. No one could stay away from the Battle of the Iron Gate Pass as long as you appeared in the field of vision. Among the masters who had appeared in person, there were Chan Jibao, who came late with a stick of plum wine, Han Diaosi, who was known to be good at killing celestial phenomena with his mysterious finger, Yang Taisui, the sick tiger who once stepped on half of the Dragon Tiger demon-slaying platform, White Bear Yuan Zuozong, the 3rd person in the Liang army, Su Fengnian, who was at the false realm with his mysterious finger, Su Weisheng, who carried the red dragon sword, Bodhisattva of Tantric Buddhism, Golden Armor Man, who used to be one of the 4 grandmasters, Su Longxiang, who was born as King Kong, and Blue Bird, who held the instant spear. They were doing the shocking business of plotting and quelling rebellion. The people who were killing each other were the princes who were likely to sit on the dragon throne and the next king of Beiliang. This was a chaotic battle that would soon determine the future of the Western region and Western Shu in Beiliang. No one dared to say that they would be the last one to laugh and survive until the end. Su Fengyan rode in the front. 12 flying swords with perfect sword embryo formed a thunder pool sword formation that he stole from Dong Tai, the god of Peach Blossom Sword. He crashed into the old monk in black, Yang Taisui, who was the main accomplice of the white cloth case in the capital. Yuan Zuozong urged his horse to follow closely behind to support His Royal Highness, but the distance between them was 50 paces apart. Along the way, the two-faced and four-armed otherworldly item in the red robe finally revealed its ferocious appearance. It bypassed Su Fengyan and the black-clothed monk and dashed straight toward the entrance of the Iron Gate Pass. Its goal was very clear. Whoever was suitable to be used as food, it would absorb their blood, flesh, and qi. The fifth raccoon was a good example. At this moment, the item's nascent core's dual-faced golden eyes were shining brightly, showing a different aura from ordinary filth. Blue Bird tilted her head for an instant and urged her horse forward. She still did not pay attention to the famous black-clothed imperial tutor. She directly led the 800 white horse righteous entourage to kill the 200 imperial guards. In the Ruran Mountains, before the battle, her young master smiled and said that he would give the fifth raccoon to her. Blue Bird did not doubt that her young master could take the fifth raccoon's head. Today, her young master was entangled with Yang Taisui, so she would not do anything unnecessary. The black-clothed young man had already abandoned his horse and walked on foot, but his body was like rolling thunder on the ground, far surpassing the galloping horse. Once again, he showed what it meant to take the lead in a battle. Wang Chong of the Phoenix Battalion stood side by side with the warhorse and His Royal Highness. He subconsciously glanced at them and clenched his spear, whispering, "Lin Heng, watch carefully." This time, His Highness single-handedly took on the bald donkey Yang Taisui. He didn't let us down. Quickly leaving His Royal Highness, Yuan Zuozong, and the black-clothed monk behind, the white horse righteous entourage began to charge. Their blood was boiling, and they were almost trembling all over. 700 of them had previously followed this unscrupulous young master who had never set foot in the military camp. They all said that other than bullying Miss Xue Ling, he only had the ability to spend money in brothels. Over the years, who didn't feel suffocated? Along the way to the west, the Beiliang young master who carried a saber and a sword did not say a word. He did not even think of saying a few words that were friendly and approachable. Fortunately, on the surface, he did not show any friendliness. Just when they were 2 miles away from the Iron Gate Pass, he said in a deep voice, "Today, follow me to kill Prince Zhao Kai of Liang." They were 200 steps away from the enemy. Yuan Meng let out a furious roar. "White horse righteous entourage. Fight to the death." The 200 imperial cavalry began to charge at the same time. None of the 16 golden-clothed bodyguards were left behind. They all mounted their horses to meet the enemy. Zhao Kai sat on the coachman's seat, squinting his eyes and looking into the distance. The talisman General Golden Armor stood quietly in front of the carriage with both hands holding the quaint sword hilt and inserted it into the ground. This ferocious sword was exchanged with the lives of the whole family of a famous swordsmith. The puppet in the golden armor was a great guru who was skinned by Han Diaosi. Its combat power alone was enough to crush the other 4 abandoned talisman armors. The female bodhisattva of Tantra in a snow-white cassock made a mudra in front of her chest with one hand and held a bottle with the other hand. The yellow sand spun crazily a few feet above her palm and gathered into a tower. It gradually formed a star vortex. Zhao Kai held the horsewhip tightly and stood up. He took a deep breath. "Will I die here?" The sturdy horsewhip in his hand suddenly broke inch by inch. The prince sneered in a low voice, "How can I die here?" Chapter 671. The history books, especially the unofficial history books, like to describe those fierce generals as the enemy of 10,000 people, but no one would take it seriously. However, the saying that the enemy of 1,000 people did exist in the army of the Liang dynasty. Although it was rare, there was a precedent. When the Su family wanted to establish Western Shu for the emperor, except for the king of Western Shu and a large number of officials, they swore to defend the country. They would rather die than surrender to the Liang dynasty, and they would rather die than flee to the imperial city. The Sword Emperor of Western Shu, as a member of the royal family of Western Shu, guarded the city gate with his sword. Unfortunately, after the battle, he was first exhausted and then crushed to death by the Beiliang cavalry. In that battle, the Sword Emperor of Western Shu killed 800 men in 3 hours. After he died, he was trampled by the horses. Then Chu Lushan put a flag on the corpse. The long chaotic wars of spring and autumn caused the soldiers to gain a lot of experience in fighting against top-class martial artists in the martial world. They had to exhaust their opponents before their morale collapsed and not give them a chance to catch their breath. These precious experiences that were gained by piling up corpses and lives were passed down from the old soldiers to the new soldiers, generation after generation. Wang Ji, as a general of the Sword Garret, was in the south of Western Shu where the Sword Emperor died. Needless to say, Beiliang had Chun Jibao and Yuan Zuozong who survived in the imperial concubine's tomb. They could be said to be worthy of being the enemy of 1,000 people. Naturally, they often used these brilliant figures as imaginary enemies to train the cavalry. However, the fierceness of the red python-robed eunuch and the craftiness of his killing methods still made Wang Ji a little unprepared. Han Diaosi rushed in a straight line, his red python robe fluttering in the wind. Thousands of red threads appeared on his hands, and he could easily take people's heads and cut them into pieces. Except for Wang Ji's Beiliang saber cutting off some of the red threads and a few capable generals who luckily survived, no less than 30 cavalrymen were strangled by this human cat. Fortunately, the cavalry battle formation did not pursue multiple rounds of killing from the beginning. They wanted to be firm. Even if they had to give up a part of the advantage of the cavalry's impact, even if they had to give the 2,000 cavalrymen behind Han Diaosi an innate advantage, they had to try their best to circle around and stop this old eunuch. The secret order Wang Ji received a few days ago was very simple. It only had 2 words: delay. With what? In addition to conserving 1,000 of his cavalry to prevent them from being defeated by the 2,000 people who knew each other well, the 2,000 cavalry that participated in the battle also did not swarm forward like a swarm of bees. Instead, they were divided into 20 cavalry groups of 100 men, striving to advance and retreat with a sense of propriety, so that the advantage of numbers could be fully utilized to the extreme. Wang Ji had already had 3 hurried exchanges with Han Diaosi. The first time, he used his saber to block the enemy, and the other 2 times, he bent down to pick up the spears of his fallen comrades. The last time, he threw his spear back to chase after the red cat and threw it behind him. One of the spears was actually wrapped around the back of the spear as if it had grown eyes, directly twisting the spear into pieces. Wang Ji threw the spear for the 3rd time, directly abandoning the man and killing the horse. The frighteningly red cat unexpectedly reined in the horse and leapt into the air, dodging the flying spear. It even pulled the heads of the surrounding 5 cavalrymen into the air. Wang Ji's eyes were bloodshot as he cursed, "Motherf *cur, you're not human at all." Behind Wang Ji, there were 8,000 horse hooves stomping on the ground. Wang Ji made a hand gesture, and the 1,000 cavalrymen who were motionless split apart like a flood, bypassing the reef in the middle of the river and rushing towards the 2,000 cavalrymen led by He Yen. In addition, the 6 cavalry groups that were on the periphery could not immediately surround the killer cat to engage in a fierce battle. Wang Ji carelessly rubbed his cheeks, spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva, and said fiercely, "If I don't die this time, no matter what, I will ask the king of Beiliang to be the general of 10,000 cavalrymen." Chun Jibao said that he wanted to kill Su Weisheng and bring her body to Western Shu to proclaim himself as the king. He did not have the slightest intention of showing any mercy, nor was he sloppy at all. Every time the plum wine came into contact with the ancient crimson feather sword, this famous sword would explode with a series of clear and melodious sounds like the roar of a dragon, trembling and melodious. Every time they collided, Su Weisheng, who was holding the sword in her right hand, would violently shake her right sleeve. The profundity of the plum wine was not limited to this. Every time Qin Jibao struck out with his spear, it seemed gentle, without the slightest bit of anger. But every time he shook his sleeve, the elite cavalrymen of the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry would suddenly die for no reason. Clearly, Before they could get within 20 steps of the two of them, they died cleanly, as if a spear had pierced through their chests. They did not even have the time to feel the pain before their bodies flew backwards, falling into the yellow sand. Chun Zhibao suddenly swung the plum wine, sweeping it out horizontally. The ancient crimson feather sword in Su Weisheng's hand drew a frightening arc that would definitely break an ordinary famous sword. The two cavalrymen behind Su Weisheng and her horse were once again mysteriously killed. Before they fell off their horses, their bodies in the air were exactly the same as the ancient crimson feather sword, drawing an arc in the air. Lightly taking back the plum wine, Chun Zhibao pointed at the ground, and the tip of the spear spun out a flower. Looking at the woman who was spitting out blood, he lightly smiled. This is the time when the plum is still young. You really don't plan on extending your left hand? The second sword of Taoism, the ancient crimson feather sword, in the end, is still the word order. Su Weisheng did not make a sound. Chun Zhibao turned his head to look at the iron gate pass. I originally wanted to go there and cut down the python and dragon, and then enter Shu alone. This way, no matter who it is acceptable. The plum wine in his hand gradually turned a deep purple. Su Weisheng threw the ancient crimson feather high into the air. High into the clouds, it attracted the heavenly thunder. Su Weisheng was just about to blurt out the word, order. A spear pierced through the abdomen. Chun Zhibao pulled out the plum wine, drawing a stream of blood from the woman's body. His face was expressionless. Su Weisheng was still trying his best to say the word, order. Then, the white-robed man spun to the end of the spear and knocked him off his horse. It seemed like he was showing mercy, but in fact, this plum turning from green to purple was the real killing move. At this moment, a woman was flying south on her sword. Behind the woman was a green-robed Confucian scholar leisurely following. The young woman was extremely beautiful, and the way she rode the sword was like a carefree immortal. She fiercely glared at Su Weisheng, who was her second mortal enemy in her life, and said coldly, I'm just watching. Don't expect me to make a move. On the other hand, the middle-aged Confucian scholar who had dominated the world chuckled and said, the plum wine goes best when it's purple. Chao Chongqing floated over and supported the woman whose soul was swaying unsteadily. He pressed down on her heart meridian, gently inserted a pill, and gently put her down. Only God knew if she was dead or alive. He was just doing his best. In fact, it was still difficult to escape death by forcefully attracting the heavenly tribulation. Death warriors deserved to die. If it wasn't for the fact that he had scouted this place and the yellow sand was thousands of miles long, even the land immortal Chao Chongqing wouldn't have been able to catch up. Chao Chongqing stood up and stretched out his hand, asking, Confucian sage Chun Zhibao, can you fight? This white-robed warrior immortal, who no one in the world knew had quietly entered the Saint Realm, raised the plum wine that was surrounded by a vast purple aura and said calmly, Please. Chapter 672. The night duty area of the Minister of Governmental Affairs was located on the east side of the palace's Longsheng Gate. Below the palace walls was a row of low-tiled houses. Compared to the grandiose style of the Hall of Governmental Affairs' two provinces, it truly seemed extremely shabby. Tonight, the current court's Grand Secretary Zhang Julu was personally on night duty in the palace. Of the three high officials, because West Chu's Grand Tutor Sun Shiji had been transferred out of the capital to become the administrator of West Chu's old territory, the Minister of Governmental Affairs of the three provinces was originally vacant. Out of the three positions, two of them were immediately left empty. This was becoming more and more outrageous, not conforming to the dynasty's etiquette system. Immediately, the influential officials of all levels of society were speculating about who would have the qualifications and luck to replace Sun Shiji and leap up. Gangnam-do's Lu Daolin had just been promoted to the position of Minister of Rights for less than a year. Yet the left Chancellor Huan immediately became the big shot that everyone looked up to. In the Minister of Governmental Affairs main hall, apart from the low room in the center with the name Zhang Lu sitting inside, Zhang Julu, Lu Daolin's younger brother Lu Baijie was also in the easternmost short room. This Tang Shi sword immortal was the newly appointed assistant minister of the Ministry of War, coincidentally also on duty. Even though the Ministry of War was controlled by Gu Jiantang, It had always been impervious to oil and salt, with the other ministers and the 5 ministries having the intention of not interfering with each other's business. Of the 6 ministries and Yamen seals, only the Ministry of War had its own main hall and side room. Towards this, Zhang Julu, who was known for being strict in governance, unexpectedly dealt with it without batting an eyelid. It was clear that not only was Great Minister Gu's rank a full rank higher than the 5 ministries' ministers, his real power was without a doubt far greater than the difference of a single rank. However, Liu Baijie, who had just entered the core of the capital's officialdom, didn't mind these things at all. When he occasionally met Grand Secretary Zhang, it wasn't just a greeting of a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. They would also stop and exchange a few words. Each time they chatted happily, not the slightest bit perfunctory. Zhang Julu was currently flipping through a forbidden book copied from the old Chu, written by a mad scholar. Sun Shiji, who had rushed to Guangling Path to take up a post to appease the clamoring public opinion, actually wrote a letter specifically for this matter, pleading for leniency for that scholar, pleading for leniency. When Zhang Julu received that letter during the day, he didn't immediately reply, only asking for a forbidden book from the Imperial Archives, carefully flipping through it. Just as he was reading to the point where his brows were furrowed, the blue-eyed, purple-bearded Grand Secretary heard a burst of bold laughter from outside the main hall. The number of old fellows who dared to cause such a ruckus in the inner court could be counted on one's fingers. Zhang Julu put down the forbidden book and glanced at the full moon hanging on the wall outside the window. In the room, several of the influential officials of the 6 ministries subconsciously stopped writing and put down their books, all of them looking at the Grand Secretary. Zhang Julu smiled and gestured at everyone, indicating that they should ignore him. Unlike when the previous Grand Secretary was in charge of the minister's desk, although the officials in Zhonglu were all 4th rank and above, they were actually almost a generation younger than before. There were very few gray-haired old men with muddled eyesight. Most of them were around 50 years old, and there was even one in his early 40s who had entered the central government as the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. Zhang Julu gently stepped over the 2 thresholds and walked out of the main hall that was privately called Zhonglu by the court. He saw the left Chancellor Huan Wen's old face that couldn't be any more familiar. In addition, there was also the Minister of Rights Liu Daolin, who was originally on duty in front of the Imperial Palace's West Chenxi Palace. When a prince left the capital to be conferred a vassal, it was a major event that would affect the entire situation. The Ministry of Rights of the Imperial Clan Court and the Hall of Governmental Affairs had to put in effort in all aspects. There was not the slightest bit of error. However, between Huan Wen and Liu Daolin, there was another man. The most conspicuous thing about him was the yellow dragon robe he wore. Zhang Julu quickly stepped forward and was about to bend down to pay his respects when the emperor gently supported his arm. Zhang Julu no longer pretended to be humble. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a young eunuch. He said he was young, but that was only in comparison to the previous eunuch from the ceremony directorate, Han Shengxian. Originally, it should have been Han Diaoxi who accompanied the emperor at his side. Zhang Julu, who had never interacted with the eunuchs of the internal court, didn't want to delve too deeply into it. It was enough to know what was going on in his heart. Liu Daolin saw that the 3 of them had no intention of immediately entering the room, so he was the first to take his leave and walked into Zhonglu. The emperor waited until the Minister of Rights entered the room before joking in a warm voice, "My 2 beloved ministers, please come with me to the Ministry of War's main hall for a while. I know where the tea is good. It's the authentic spring spirit lake tea before the rain. Zhonglu's side isn't good. The tea is also sloppy and can't enter one's mouth." Zhang Julu, who didn't pay much attention to the rules when interacting with his subjects in private, smiled and said, "Sure. I don't like shamelessly freeloading wine. Things like freeloading tea. There's no harm in doing it a few times while General Gu isn't here. However, I reckon that Chancellor Huan won't be interested." Huan Wen glared at him and said, "Zhang Baiyan, you've only just seen His Majesty and you're already in a hurry to set me up?" Zhang Julu glanced unhappily at Huan Wen, who had his hands behind his back. "Such a strong aroma of wine, do you think I can't smell it? Since His Majesty has rewarded you with good wine, you should obediently shut up and drink your wine later. Don't get drunk and go crazy." Huan I, who was exposed by his bad friend, laughed loudly. The emperor of the Zhao family was also in a good mood. He walked with the two pillars of the country to the Ministry of War's East Wing main hall. There was a saying that there was a confrontation with Zhang Lu here. With regards to these harmless disputes, the emperor heard them and dismissed them with a laugh. Even in front of Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang, he could still casually tease them without any ill feelings. After crossing the threshold, they saw that His Majesty had personally come to the main hall. The officials of the Ministry of War in the outer and inner rooms all rushed out and knelt on the ground. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War, Lu Baijie, knelt at the front, and his voice was also the most passionate and mellow. The emperor had everyone rise. He had no intention of lecturing them. He only asked them to return to their desks to deal with military affairs. However, he left Lu Baijie behind. The emperor of the Zhao family thought highly of this person. He had repeatedly ordered him to enter the palace to discuss military affairs. He had even asked Sword Fairy Tang Shi to teach swordsmanship to a few of the imperial grandsons. It could be said that the emperor's kindness was vast and mighty. This allowed Lu Baijie to quickly establish himself in the imperial court in the capital. No one dared to slight him. There was a huge painting of mountains and rivers hanging on the wall of the outer room. The emperor had the three dignitaries sit down and drink tea. He himself stood under the painting and picked up a slender red sandalwood pole. For the time being, he did not point out anything on the painting. Zhang Julu drank a mouthful of the goddess of spring Bilyakonch, which had become a tribute tea because of a poem. He whispered to the left chancellor of the Imperial College, who was sitting on the chair next to him, "Drink further away. The aroma of the tea is all washed away." Huan Wen retorted, "The room is only so big and the wine is so fragrant. Where do you want me to go?" After he finished speaking, he asked the attendant in the main hall to ask for an extra cup from the spring kiln. He handed it to the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Lu Baijie, and said with a smile, "Sword Fairy Tang Shi, let's drink to our heart's content. It's 2-1. If someone has to scram, it should be that blue-eyed guy. Isn't that right?" Lu Baijie, who had the bearing of a scholarly general, took the cup with a smile and said softly, "I'll drink the wine, but if it's not right, Left Chancellor, I really don't dare to say." Zhang Julu laughed angrily. "Each one is more slippery than the other. The Left Chancellor who carries the wind and moon on his shoulders? The Sword Fairy Tang Shi who is generous and unsophisticated? Why does it change when it comes to me?" Chapter 673. The emperor, who had left his servants and eunuchs outside in the middle of the night, turned around with a smile and asked, "Julu, tell me more about the imperial examinations, North and South rankings, and the selection of soldiers. I have read the memorial. Although I can recognize all 60,000 words, there are still many parts one don't understand. Especially the part where the strong medicine will cure the illness, but after 100 years we will see the shortcomings of the party. That memorial started strong but ended weak. It was not detailed enough, so I want to talk more about it tonight. Chancellor Huan and Assistant Minister Lu, don't be idle. If you have any ideas, speak. Whether it is tea or wine, I will give you all plenty. If you don't give me an explanation before dawn, don't blame me for being stingy. How much tea and wine did you drink? I will charge you according to the market price. Don't think about paying less." Zhang Julu faced Huan Wen and Lu Baijie and smiled. "How is it? Am I being unreasonable, or is your Majesty being unreasonable?" The two nodded and smiled. "Your Majesty is even more unreasonable." The emperor laughed heartily. "If it were anyone else, they would be praising me for being thrifty and diligent in governing the country." The emperor of Zhao waved his hand to signal for the servants to retreat into the room and close the door. He picked an expensive chair with exquisite workmanship and sat down. However, he still held the sandalwood pole in his hand and placed it on his knees. He received a cup of refreshing tea from Lu Baijie. They talked until dawn, but the four of them were still not tired at all. They were still in high spirits. In terms of diligent governance, the Emperor of Zhao could indeed be ranked in the top 3 of all the emperors in history. Although there were still some details that were not mentioned, The emperor still stood up and rubbed his hands and feet. He walked to the giant painting with his back facing the three of them. He drew an arc at the intersection of Beiliang and Western Shu. He asked, "Are they all here?" Zhang Julu said in a low voice, 60,000 cavalry. There are still 20,000 cavalry on the road. The emperor, who was using the wooden pole to point out the country, smiled and said, "There is not much difference between 60,000 and 80,000, unless 60,000 is 600,000. Zhang Julu nodded. The emperor of Zhao threw away the pole and went to the table to grab a porcelain cup that had already turned cold. However, he did not raise it. Perhaps he was not in the mood to drink tea to quench his thirst. Or was he afraid that his subjects would see the details of his trembling when he raised his cup? He looked down at the teacup and asked softly, "Do you?" Zhang Julu calmly shook his head and said, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. They won't fight." When the Zhao family's son heard this clear answer, he smiled and put down the teacup that he had never lifted. He raised his head and said, "You guys should rest early too." After Liu Baijie and the two old officials saw His Majesty out of the main hall, they returned to the room alone and inadvertently looked at the table. There were still some ripples in the cup. No one would believe that a large net had been cast on the border of Beiliang. It could be said that all the old subordinates of the Gu party had come out. 60,000 men and horses had rushed to set up camp in one place under the pretext of redeployment. There were even 20,000 cavalry who had rushed into the border from Jizhou. The momentum was so great that it could not be concealed at all. The 60,000 men and horses that were already in place were led by Kai Nan, a former subordinate of General Gu Jiantang. They had formed a loose defense line on the border that went against the common rules of the art of war. This defense system was like a child's play. Not to mention the cavalry in the north that had shocked the two dynasties. Even the ordinary cavalry of the Duke of Guangling and Duke of Yanqi could be destroyed in one go. However, when Kai Nan led hundreds of soldiers to patrol the front line, there were no signs of any changes. The generals and captains in the army were not without doubts. However, when one of them asked and was sternly reprimanded by Kai Nan, no one dared to ask again. Kai Nan rode on his horse and looked to the north. All sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. He muttered to himself, "I just wish I could have 40,000 more men to symbolically place people on the entire border. This way, we can put up a formation that will not allow the Beiliang cavalry to openly enter the border. Otherwise, if a fight really breaks out, how can 60,000 people block it? However, if the Beiliang army dares to charge in, so what if you kill all 60,000 of my men? Openly rebel? I've been waiting for this day." Kai Nan thought this way. However, when he thought about it more deeply, he felt like he was walking on thin ice when he thought about how he had to be an enemy of the general who was much more famous than Minister Gu. A pawn that crossed the river had no choice. Kai Nan knew that he had to suffer. As for why there was such a commotion, Kai Nan only knew that Prince Zhao Kai had gone to the western regions. Could it be that someone in Beiliang wanted to kill this famous prince? Although Kai Nan was a martial artist, he understood the superficial logic of not having a proper status. If Prince Zhao Kai, whose background was unclear, really had such intentions, he would definitely have done so. Moreover, the capital was currently in a crucial period when the princes were being conferred the title of king. If Zhao Kai could really gain power in the western regions, Kai Nan did not need to think to know that he would definitely become a king with real power. If he went to western Shu and became the king of Shu, then that would be interesting. A scout quickly rushed back. His face was pale. After dismounting, he knelt on the ground and said in a trembling voice, "The Beiliang cavalry has arrived. I don't know the exact number, but there are at least 10,000 of them. However, these 10,000 cavalry are the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry." Kai Nan's expression was normal. However, the joints of his fingers holding the sword were white. Was 10,000 cavalry soldiers of the king of Beiliang a small number? Kai Nan felt that it was too much. Gritting his teeth, Kai Nan ordered a trusted general behind him, "Pass down the order. Within 100 miles, gather the troops here." Kai Nan looked into the distance. Yellow sand rolled in his field of vision. Kai Nan's mouth was bitter. He took a deep breath. Which adopted son will be leading the troops? He did not care about being stopped. He insisted on leaving the soldiers behind and charged forward alone. When Kainan was half a mile away, he did not dare to take half a step forward. The endless horsemen stopped their horses solemnly on the vast plain. Kainan could see a royal flag with the word Su flapping in the wind. A rider stepped out of the formation and slowly advanced. Kainan's eyes widened. His breathing, which could be considered steady, suddenly became hurried. The old man was wearing armor and holding a spear. Kainan's mind was blank. He did not know why, but his hands and feet could not help but dismount. He knelt on the ground and shouted respectfully, "This General Kainan pays his respects to the king of Bailiang." The man, horse, and spear approached Kainan. The general gave a light sound of acknowledgement. The warhorse continued to slowly move forward. The sound of its hooves trampled on Kainan's heart. Reining in his horse, the general Su Shao finally put on his armor and spear again. He looked into the distance and asked softly, "Only 60,000 men. Isn't Gu Jiantang being too stingy?" Kainan, who had been kneeling on the ground all this time, could not care about his pride. His face was covered in sand. He did not dare to make a sound. This butcher smiled. "Don't worry, I'm just waiting for someone. I won't kill anyone. As long as you don't interfere, this king has no interest in falling out with anyone." Su Shao smiled. "Let's go, General Kai. Let this king see the glory of the Gu clan's cavalry." On this day, when the king of Bailiang, Su Shao, and his cavalry were about to enter battle, someone dismounted and shouted, "Greetings to the general." The 20,000 cavalry soldiers who had rushed over all knelt. Chapter 674. East of Iron Gate Pass was favorable for cavalry attacks, so it was naturally a good place where it was easy for people to die. 200 light cavalry faced 800 light cavalry. The 200 Imperial Army soldiers didn't cower in the slightest. It was different from a few years ago when the children of influential families from the capital mixed into the Imperial family's personal army to earn a living. After Zhang Julu took power, he personally flipped through the Imperial Army's records. As long as they were the descendants of ministers or high-ranking officers, they would all be expelled from the Imperial Army in a single day. That day, the military camp was already half empty. Many of the children of generals who relied on their own abilities to enter the army were no exception. This made Zhang Julu extremely unpopular among the capital's officials and generals. When quite a few old generals who had meritorious achievements met, they all began to curse at him. One of the old generals who lived on the same street directly blocked the door, questioning that purple-bearded and blue-eyed man, questioning why with his grandson's strength he couldn't be an ordinary soldier of the Imperial Army. Grand Secretary Zhang walked out the door, calmly saying, "Your grandson indeed has the ability, but your great-grandson definitely won't have this ability in the future. This official is only closing this door 20 years in advance." Back then, the old general who still held an important position didn't understand that scholarly and twisted reasoning. Fortunately, he didn't dare roll up his sleeves and use force against the current Grand Secretary, only deciding to never interact with him again. The two families who originally had a harmonious relationship even had a joyous marriage delayed. Only many years later did the old general retire from the Ministry of War's second highest position, and only then did he take the initiative to apologize. The black-clothed youth passed by Feng Battalion's officer Yuan Meng and Blue Bird, facing a middle-aged martial artist who rushed out of the cavalry formation. This imperial bodyguard didn't use a blade. After his arms were grabbed by Su Longxiang's hands, the flesh on his originally thick and solid arms immediately dried up, becoming a ghastly bag of bones. After breaking free from his shackles, he seized the initiative with a flip of his hand, wishing to tear apart the hands of the sallow and skinny youth in front of him. Su Longxiang still allowed him to exert his strength quickly, only kicking out. The middle-aged imperial bodyguard, who had been protecting the imperial prince Zhao Kai all this time, had originally intended to trade a life for a life by tearing off Su Longxiang's arms and forcefully blocking the kick through his chest. However, when his arms suddenly expanded to the size of large bowls, the youth still didn't move an inch. The imperial bodyguard immediately let go, both hands pressing down on the youth's toes, his entire body borrowing the force to soar into the air, avoiding a fatal blow. The man from Jianghu's hidden sects crossed his legs, as if he was climbing a ladder. He was fast, but Su Longxiang's hand was even faster. He grabbed one of the man's ankles, pulling his entire body down, and raised his knee to strike. The man, who had immersed himself in secret manuals after entering the palace, used all his strength to elbow him, but he was still hit in the stomach by the youth's knee. His well-built body floated backwards. Fortunately, the cavalry behind him were skilled in horsemanship and were able to quickly circle around him. The man's 5 fingers were like hooks grabbing the ground, carving out a gully several zhang long on the ground. Only then did he stop retreating, his stomach churning and blood seeping out of the corner of his mouth. The man stood up with a bit of fear in his eyes. Since scholars could sell their talents to the royal family, many of the top boorish men were willing to sell their martial arts to the court. Unlike the Su family in Beiliang, who had no official position or power, as long as one had the ability, they could take a position in the royal palace in the capital. Because of his outstanding martial arts, this golden saber imperial bodyguard, who had been bestowed with a yellow saber by the emperor, was a well-known figure. Once, when he returned home to visit his family, his sect had been suppressed by the governor and the general. When he returned, the world had been turned upside down. The snobbish governor had asked an old scholar to write a plaque and personally sent someone to hang it in the sect. Originally, he had been restricted by the rules of the palace and had not planned on arguing with the governor. After that, he brought a disciple of his sect's martial uncle to the capital and luckily became the second Golden Saber Imperial bodyguard. The middle-aged Golden Saber Imperial bodyguard slowly exhaled and surrounded the black-clothed youth with many of his colleagues. The man thought to himself that even if he died here today, he would not let down the sect. Su Longxiang strode forward in a straight line, his eyes fixed on the woman in the white cassock. Bluebird was the first to break the formation. The spear in her hand deflected a spear from the enemy's face. With a light shake of her wrist, she used the delaying formula and the curved spear technique to pierce through the back of the valiant rider who had thought that it would be over in one round. The curved spear returned. Bluebird's spear swept across in an instant and the body of the imperial bodyguard was cut into 2. She didn't continue to fight. After killing one of the cavalry generals, she didn't use it again. Even if the imperial cavalry stopped her for a moment, she only rushed towards the carriage. When the first wave of riders' spears brushed past, more than 30 corpses rolled on the ground. It was like 2 blades cutting into each other's flesh. The 2 wounds continued to tear and expand rapidly. Yuan Meng's spear flipped over an enemy rider. The body of the imperial bodyguard, who had a bloody hole in his armor, was thrown into the air. The rider who still had the strength to fight turned his body in the air. He wanted to land on the ground and stabilize himself before pulling out his sword to fight again. Unfortunately, before he could land on the ground, his head was chopped off by a white horse rider. Yuan Meng laughed loudly. "Ruthless Hong, this head is yours. When we get back, don't be so stingy. I'll treat you, Field Officer Yuan, to a good meal." The expressionless Hong Shuwen muttered softly, "Let me be a deputy field officer and I'll treat you to wine." Chapter 675. Yuan Meng's ears were good. Even in the midst of the battle, he could still hear clearly. He laughed and scolded, "Bullsh *T. You can talk to me about this after you've killed 10 people." The northern cold saber in Hong Shuwen's hand twisted and changed into an inverted scallion thrust, bending his waist to dodge the spear. Borrowing the momentum of the warhorse charging forward, the cold saber slid rapidly along the spear shaft, cutting off the enemy rider's arm with one slash, and then the Phoenix Battalion's famed ruthlessness cut off half of his head. The horse was still galloping forward, but the man was already dead. Hong Shuwen, who still had one Beiliang saber at his waist, said indifferently, "2. Wang Chong, who was charging forward on his horse, glanced at the white horse protector who had died in front of him and gritted his teeth. Suddenly, a red cloud floated over their heads and fell outside the iron gate. Before one of the royal guards fell to the ground and died, he could vaguely see the warring state's master riding his flying sword in the distance. He cursed weakly as he closed his eyes. F***ck your 18 generations of scholars in the capital. Didn't you all say that the crown prince of Beiliang only knew how to bully women? Su Fengnian had seen the Thunder Pool twice. Outside the martial emperor city, Dong Tai's Thunder Pool sword formation killed the celestial being Zhao Xuansu. The Thunder Pool in the mausoleum of the Yellow Emperor was destroyed by the demon Luo Yang with a flick of her sword. Every success and every defeat. Su Fengnian had his own Thunder Pool with flying swords. He had once told Su Beiji that within a few feet of the Thunder Pool, killing people with flying swords was as easy as pie. At first, the sickly old monk in black did not pay much attention to the young heir of Beiliang's talk of revenge. Yang Taisui was a martial artist, and even a level 2 master of martial arts could make Su Fengnian suffer, not to mention Yang Taisui. But when the heir of Beiliang charged over on horseback, his sword chi poured out in torrents like a broken dam. He was a little surprised. Over the years, Yang Taisui had stayed away from the disputes in the palace and traveled the Jianghu. With his rich shrewdness and experience, he was able to deduce the inside story that was not too far from the truth with just a few scattered words in the Wulin. However, he had expected Su Fengnian, who had the great yellow courtyard that Wang Zhongluo had bestowed upon him, to not have so little inner strength, and his sword chi should not be so ferocious. Yang Taisui gently waved his sleeve again and again. The 12 flying swords bounced back again and again. Su Fengnian stopped his horse about 10 zhang away, his hands pressing down on the spring thunder and spring autumn. He was quiet, not making a sound, not saying a word. This was the power of the Wu family's flying swords with a perfect sword embryo. Where one's mind was, the tip of the sword would be there. Moreover, these 12 flying swords were the condensation of the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai's life's work. Even if he had erased the Rui sword embryo before giving the swords to them, the 12 flying swords themselves had long been smooth and transparent. Return to the sect. The old monk in black smiled and spat out these 2 words. One of his hands formed a palm in front of his chest. With a flick of his sleeve, he drew the 6 flying swords into his sleeve. His large sleeve billowed like a balloon. Of the remaining 6 flying swords, Taiya stabbed towards the space between Yang Taisui's eyebrows. The old monk raised his hand and slapped, sticking close to Taiya. His body seemed to be moving slowly, but this palm forcefully caught 4 flying swords, including Taiya, in the air. The other 2 bamboo horse and peach blossom swords struck the old monk's back one after another. However, the Kasaya was like a stone thrown into a lake. Waves rippled behind it. The bamboo horse and peach blossom swords returned without any effect and were caught between the 4 fingers of Yang Taisui's palm. The 12 swords were all in the old monk's sleeve and hand. Yang Taisui looked at the young man sitting still on the horse and said softly, "Your Highness, can you retreat now?" Su Fengnian twitched the corner of his mouth. "It's still early. You're not dead yet." He stretched out his hand and flicked his fingers in the air in front of him. The 6 swords were still imprisoned by the fingers of the old monk in black, but the 6 swords in the sleeves had already broken out of the sleeves. Yang Taisui was surprised and muttered to himself, "Breaking longevity with a knock of the fingers?" Tao was not monopolized by Taoism. The 3 sects had always been searching for their own Tao. And Confucianism was not the same as the Confucianism that St. Zhang had set down layers of rules and regulations. If it were not for the fact that he owed a favor that he had to repay, Chao Chongqing would have liked to chat with the white-clothed soldier sage about the differences between their Taos. Chao Chongqing had become a Confucian sage thanks to the ruins of the Western Wall, thanks to the princess words that the rise and fall of the people were the suffering of the people, and thanks to the noble spirit of the scholars that remained after the fall of West Chu. He was very curious about how Chun Jibao could skip the celestial phenomenon and become an earth immortal. In fact, with Chun Jibao's extraordinary talent, he had followed the martial arts realm step by step into the celestial phenomenon realm, and then became an earth immortal with the identity of a Confucian sage. Such a Confucian sage who had the saints of the 3 sects and the martial arts path, he was afraid that he could only admit defeat. The current Chun Jibao was in a very mysterious and unprecedented state. He was neither a fake earth immortal, nor was he a transcendent earth immortal like Wang Xianji. What a pity. How good would it be to wait for another 10 years? However, there was one thing that he could be sure of. Chen Jibao's quiet entry into the sage realm had a lot to do with the death of the dragon tree holy monk of the two Zen temples. After a long sigh, Chao Chongqing stretched out his hand and grabbed. He replaced Su Weisheng to say the word imperial, that he did not have time to say. A purple heavenly thunder was forcefully grabbed down from the 9 heavens. The reason why Chao Chongqing was known as the top of the celestial phenomenon realm was naturally because of his great talent. Previously, after Chen Jibao faced Chao Chongqing, he gently dismounted and patted the warhorse to let it run away. He looked up at the thunder falling. Suddenly, he stabbed the dark purple plum wine into the ground. Chao Chongqing smiled slightly and said the word imperial again, this time with his palm facing down. Law phenomenon.